Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. It's 9 o'clock and we have a packed schedule. So we will try to stay on track at least for the opening session. I think that should be a good commitment to have. My name is Sven and I will guide you today through this training day on harmonized European standards. We have, as you can see, quite a lot of people joining us in Brussels, but we also have an audience online, people who will be following from their home or office. So there's plenty of people today to listen and learn together about this topic. It will be quite a packed day. We'll have a lot of speakers and we try to intertwine those as well with some interaction moments. We'll have a Mentimeter that will pop up regularly and we'll give you the chance to experiment with that also before we start the sessions. The Mentimeters are anonymous, so you don't have to fear that your voice will be called out, so we don't know who is answering which question, so feel free to be honest and open to what is being asked. We'll have a lunch break and 2 coffee breaks, so we'll have time to also digest all this information that has been coming in. And in order to keep you on track and to get the most out of this one day, I would kindly invite you to follow my 3 standard rules. I have 3 standard rules for each training course or event that I'm doing. And the first one is try and avoid your weapons of mass distraction. You all know them. There's those small cubes that you have in your pocket or bigger cubes that you put on tables. Of course, it's totally fine to take notes, but as this is a training course and we're trying to transmit some learning into you, please try and avoid to do emails and all those other kind of things. It would be really good if you could focus here on what is going on. Second rule, time is precious, so be on time. And that also goes for the speakers. So stick with your allocated time, because whatever time we get late, the person in the end is going to suffer from that, because there will be no more time for him or her to bring their contribution, which without a doubt will also be interesting. And then lastly, specifically for you, the audience, the learning is up to the learner. We can only facilitate, we can give you input, we can give you reflection questions, but in the end, the learning has to come from you. So always ask for yourself, how does this apply to me? What is useful for me in this contribution? I think that's it for setting the tone, at least from my side, because we'll have some more tone setting by Cinzia Misorilli. She's the Sen and Senelic Director of Standardization, and she will welcome you and also introduce the day. The floor is yours.
And welcome to all of you. It's really a pleasure to see so many having taken the time to come here to Brussels. And also, of course, welcome to those online that will stay with us for the morning sessions. And I think this is a great opportunity because while we were discussing with colleagues from the European Commission, and we think that the last time we had an event such like this one, it was like at least 6 or 7 years ago. And many things have happened since then. One thing is for sure, what was true more than 7 years ago, we want to keep it to be true also now and for the future, that European standards are an essential tool for the internal market, and we wanted to keep it for the next 100 years or more. And I was telling that this is a great opportunity because it allows you to meet your peers, to meet the colleague from the Sen Senelec Management Center, to mingle also with the HAS consultant, with representatives of the European Commission. Is a day where you are invited to ask questions, to challenge, to propose solution, why not? And we are also here to listen to you and to exchange together how we can do things better. You know, the current system has been a bit of under some pressure over the last few years, especially with the gap that has intercurred with the HAS contract interruption that occurred a few years ago, and now we are slowly but surely recovering the time that was lost a couple of years ago. I think that things are also improving. Things are getting better. The backlog is reducing. The timeliness for the HAS consultant to submit the report is decreasing. Yet, as you are aware, the biggest challenge for us and for our technical committees and experts is to get that famous compliant assessment. Today, we are covering two sectors, the machinery and the health sectors. And for the time being, in the machinery sectors, we have like 72% of lack of compliance, and in the health sector, the 57% of lack of compliance throughout the different stages of the standards development process. So, as you see, there are still some room for improvements, but there are tools that have been developed, guidance that has been developed over the last few years, and really not only the Science and Management Center, but also all the people that are working in our framework and here to support the technical committees to deliver and to make sure, as I mentioned, that standards keep on delivering and providing presumption of conformity to the European legislation. What we are going to provide you today is for guidance, solutions. What are not we going to address today is the recent ECJ ruling. I know that many of you are curious what is going to happen after the ruling that occurred on the 5th of March, but this is something that is currently being discussed at higher level between the Sen and Senelec representatives and the European Commission representatives to find sustainable solutions. And I'm sure that we will do so. Last but not least, as I mentioned, is a day where you will get to meet your peers, so stay with us until the end. As a matter of fact, after the end of the sessions, also this afternoon session, there is a networking cocktail, so please enjoy this one as well. And last, a service message, someone lost their Mobib card. So if someone needs to find it, I have it in my table over there. So, but without further ado, I really wish you an excellent and fruitful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, tasks for you, what I got from this speech. Meet and mingle. Make sure you do that. Question, but also challenge us. You are already quite on the way to get compliance, but there's still a way to go, and there are tools to help you. I promised you some interaction, and we're going to test that now. So if you take out your phones and you scan the QR code, that should lead you to a Mentimeter question, which will ask, where did you travel from? And then, of course, we are curious to see what is the result. And you can drop your pin on the image. You might need to enlarge it a little bit. But once you pin, we will see where you are from. And I see the first ones appearing. We have people from everywhere, but at the moment more from Brussels, or at least you traveled from Brussels. 8. We have 8 from Germany as well. I see 6 from France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Austria, Poland, Lithuania twice, Sweden 26, 27 from Belgium, Finland is also there, and I see some people still need. If you can bring the Mentimeter up again, Mara? Yes, exactly. Thank you. So, quite a diverse group of people here. And Ella, are the ones from online also joining us? Yes, so we also have the people online joining in this Mentimeter, so they're also engaged. We have 111 people who already have given their location. And fantastic. We will use the same tool throughout the day, and you will get the same QR codes. If you just leave the browser to that page, a new question will appear every time. It's really easy to play around with it. All right, let's dive into the content with our first speaker, and that is Federico Musso. He's the team leader at the European Commission at DG Grow H3, and he will give you some insights on the legal framework. The floor is yours. Thank you. How much time do I have? You have 2 minutes. No, that's not correct. 8.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay. You can start with my presentation then straight away. Okay, really starting from the basic. The new approach. This is basically where all started, why we are here today. It was introduced almost 40 years ago, and it was based on 4 key principles that have, back then, revolutionized the single market for goods in the European Union. Actually, it is as the basis of the single market for goods. These 4 principles are probably all familiar to you, and most of them also refer to the role of harmonized standards. So essential requirements in legislation, not detailed legislation like in the old approach. Technical specifications that are met by harmonized standards, presumption of conformity if the products comply with these harmonized standards, and of course, the use of harmonized standards remain in principle voluntary. There are a couple of exceptions, we know construction products, but in principle, harmonized standards, even after a citation, remains voluntary. Let's see. Well, new approach was in a way the past. Today we are in the new NLF, in the new legislative era, which is a sort of new approach 2.0. It started the process of this switch, this progress in 2008, when the Commission adopted 2 legal acts, this regulation and this decision, which are of horizontal nature, and according to which all the sectoral legislation had to be adapted. And of course, the new regulation of standardization, which came into force in the beginning of 2013, was part of this switch from the new approach to the NLF system. However, even under the NLF, the 4 basic principles I showed before have remained the same. This has not changed. They remain 4 pillars also of the NLF. So, focusing, of course, on the standardization regulation, which is probably that we are going to look at today mostly. What is the scope of it? Well, it replaced the previous Directive 98/34, where standardization was one of the many elements of the directives. You have notification, you have the other elements related to the single market for goods. It's actually focused much more, and it provided much more flesh to the bones of the European standardization system. It basically is based on creating a public-private partnership between, of course, the EU institution, and the European Commission plays a prominent role in that, and the 3 European standardization organizations that the legislators identified as the 3 private members of the European standardization system, CENELEC and ETSI, only those 3. The regulation gives an empowerment to the Commission to request standards in support of EU legislation and policy. And I say standards, not harmonized standards, because we can also request, actually we can request also other types of documents like technical specification, technical reports. Does not happen very often, but it happens. In support of EU law in most cases, but sometimes even in support of policy actions. We had in the past nanotechnology. There is no legislation for that. Nevertheless, we thought there was an interest in having European standards for nanotechnology, so we issued standardization request. But in most cases, at least those you are working on, it's always in support of EU harmonization legislation. Of course, it explains the process for requesting and then for citing the official journal Harmonized standards. And it introduced a number of basic core principles: inclusiveness, transparency. These are important for the democratic legitimacy later of the legal effect. In the end, we give a legal effect via this process to private documents developed by private organizations. Even these legal effects, like every other legal effect, need some sort of democratic legitimacy. Of course, Parliament is not involved. The Council, where the member states' government are present, are not involved. So the democratic legitimacy is given via a number of controls that the legislator gave the Commission the task to exercise, as well as this element of inclusiveness, of transparency, which are also essential for the democratic legitimacy. And of course, in the regulation, we also regulate a little bit how we financially support these organizations, the ESOs, which play such an important role in the system. Some differences, comparison between new approach and NLF, of course, with a focus on standards and standardization. By the way, once these acts were adopted, of course, there was a transition. All the different directives and regulations needed to be adapted to the new NLF system. Now, I think with the approval of the new construction products regulation and the new machinery regulation, we could say that the transition has been completed. All the sectoral harmonization legislation has become NLF in its approach, in its format. And so we are really now fully in the NLF era in all sectors. It's, of course, if you look at the standardization system since the regulation entered into force and before, it's clear the system has become more formalized, more regulated. It's not as it was before. And the main reason is indeed to ensure that there is this democratic legitimacy element of the legal effect. This is really the core reason for all these processes and formal elements. I make an example. In the past, so in the old, pre-2013 system, mandates were basically almost private documents signed by the director at the commission level. Basically, it was sort of, I wouldn't say a contract. It was even less formal than a contract. And it was sent to the ESOs, and then the ESOs would organize a meeting internally, and then they would decide, okay, how do we respond to this mandate sent by the commission? There was no inclusiveness, no social stakeholders. Very often, only the few companies that had the possibility to participate in a technical committee were the ones deciding on a mandate. And this is, of course, this was identified back then as a problem, of course, because it was really a sort of very small group of people taking important decisions. And this could not go on like that, according to the legislators, which therefore decided to have all these elements added. Of course, it makes the procedure a little bit heavier, but on the other hand, at the same time, it's making it more transparent, inclusive, and also really it ensures an acceptance also afterwards of the legal effect. Some other difference in the old system, well, there was actually no criteria at all in the legislation for citation. It said, well, the ESOs provide the standards, the Commission cites them on the official journal, full stop. In the standardization regulation, we have some basic criteria. They are not very detailed, but of course, compliance with the standardization request, compliance with the law at the end. And the standardization request is the necessary legal basis, and it must be adopted after its inclusion on the annual union work program. So there are a number of criteria which were totally absent before. That's for that reason in the past, and you have probably noticed a difference because HAS consultants are part of this, but also the people in the technical committees have directly noticed. Before, Commission had a more hands-off approach because in absence of clear criteria and in absence of clear formal processes, we said, okay, we trust the experts do the work, and basically we don't have to intervene much, only if really necessary. Of course, now, I guess you have all seen it, the situation is quite different. And this is undeniable, and this is clearly also a consequence of some provisions, some articles in the standardization regulation. This new role of the Commission was confirmed also in some jurisprudence, because since 2016 we had some court case. Actually, everybody talks about Elliott. This was a starting point, but actually there's been a string of legal court cases. There's been quite some jurisprudence clarifying each time some part of the regulation. And it is clear that this had consequences also in the way we implement the regulation. So the new format for standardization requests, which is very different than in the past. The new way, and we will have a presentation later by one of my colleagues on the citing standards in the official journal, and so on. And of course, what is important here, the new system for assessment of harmonized standards. I'm trying to switch. Yeah. If you want to have more details on this, there are 2 guidance documents out there which are basically providing all the information and much more. One is the Blue Guide. This is really a little bit the Bible, in a way, or the interpretation of the Bible for all NLF legislation aspects. So it doesn't limit itself to standards, standardization, role of notified bodies, role of market surveillance authorities, legal effects, modules for conformity assessment. Everything is there. It's been updated last time in 2022. It's, of course, freely available. And I think when you have to look into something, this is the really best source of information that you can get. Vademecum, already some years ago, but still useful as an element. This was adopted by our unit in collaboration with ESOS, provides a number of clarification and guidance, specifically on the adoption, execution of standardization requests. I will surf very, very quickly, because I'm aware of the time, to the court cases, also because I think you know very well the James Elliott ruling, which is was a milestone ruling, of course, the first one ever on the court on a harmonized standards. Here's the main takeaway, which also I think for today's seminar, the second one is the more important. Of course, it shows the importance of the control exercised by the Commission, Article 10.5 of the regulation. This is really essential because we cannot have a blind delegation, said the rule. Of course, we give a delegation to the ESOS to draft things that will become part of EU law, but it's not a blind delegation. There must be a control element. Also, less important, but still relevant for you, maybe not everybody knows this ruling, 2017, it shows the essential link between the standardization request, the mandate, and the harmonized standards. These 3 are citations from the ruling itself. So this is really essential. Standardization request, harmonized standards, this is a very, legally speaking, an essential link. We published a communication in 2018 before changing the way we publish standards on the official journal, and of course, we made our commitment to keep the system functioning, and we also explained the role of the HAS consultant in this communication from 2018. Some important elements for this, we will have later other presentations, so about the annual UNO work program of the preparation of standardization requests. We have dedicated slides later. Execution, Article 10.5, Article 10.6, this is the legal territory where the HAS consultant operates. This is the assessment of compliance of draft harmonized standards, 10.5, and the final assessment, 10.6, before citation in the official journal. So these are the legal basis basically for the work and what we will be discussing today. And almost finished, well, of course, this I don't even have to explain in detail. Following the ruling, following these articles, of course, now the Commission decided in 2018 to take a more leading role in the assessment, and of course, we do it very often, not exclusively, but in most cases, via the system of HAS consultant as was set up on the 1st of April 2018. Their role is really to work to support the Commission services in fulfilling this legal obligation. It's essential for this, and of course, they are therefore, in a way, working under our instructions, and it's really not working for the ESOS. It's really the main, let's say, client is the European Commission. You will see the slides later. Here we receive the technical specification for the call for tenders, which are important for the more recent contract, in case you want to see some details, the do's and don'ts of the system. And also, these are the changes. We increased the budget in the current contract, the resources, to try to make it, even more responsive and adequate to the needs. So that was, we will have the possibility later to go on some details. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that introduction. As I'm a citizen, what I take with me is that there's more democratic legitimacy right now, and also the introduction of the HAS consultants. Maybe just quickly raise your hand if you identify as a HAS consultant. We see, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, they're kind of spread around to the room. We have, I think I counted more or less 10 people here. Some good news, we have about 150 people joining online, and they have the privilege, a privilege that you don't have, to communicate a lot. So apparently we also have quite a lively chat debate going on. You'll have to take that opportunity during the break to chat with each other. Our next speaker is Are Viljanen, also from the European Commission, as well from DG GROW H3, and he will talk about the role and objectives of harmonized standards in the new legislative framework. Welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First time, some history. First time I visited Brussels, it was 1990. And the reason was that there was a seminar arranged by Senelec under the Machinery Directive, and most likely the purpose of the seminar was to discuss how to get all the harmonized standards ready by 1992 when the new directive was applicable. So it's nice to be back. Okay, what is NLF? I will give some overview and history. So NLF comes from the new legislative framework for marketing of products, and the package was adopted 2008. Federico already mentioned the regulations related. So NLF, like New Approach, but New Approach was not so precise. NLF is a legislative technique for creating single market for goods, or improving the previously New Approach. And the core issues in this NLF package were to improve the ruling, the market surveillance requirements, setting accreditation requirements for conformity assessment bodies, and especially for notified bodies. Then also it deals with the notification of conformity assessment bodies. It harmonizes the rules for the CE marking, and it gives a toolbox for measures to be used in the legislation. So there is this so-called NLF decision, which gives model articles for product legislation. And of course then standardization regulation, which was adopted 2012, it's part of this package, and it made some modifications to the original NLF package. So what is the role of harmonized standard in NLF? I have listed here four bullets. For example, harmonized standards, they have a role in the market surveillance. And it comes from the presumption of conformity, which must be accepted by the market surveillance authorities if harmonized standards cited in the OJEU are applied and complied with. Then it has a role in the accreditation. So there are specific harmonized standards for accreditation of notified bodies, or more generally, conformity assessment bodies. Then for notified bodies, they are also important because, especially in certain sectors like in construction, the competence of notified bodies are are defined on the basis of the product's specific harmonized standards under which they can evaluate the products. And then the toolbox for future legislation is, first of all, there are a lot of terms and definitions, harmonized terms and definitions, which should be used in all legislation based on NLF. Then the other essential thing is that NLF legislation should give essential requirements, and then there should be Commission-requested harmonized standards to give voluntary technical solutions to comply with the essential requirements. Then, of course, there are a lot of procedures. There are procedures for requesting harmonized standards. There are procedures for publication harmonized standard in the official journal. And then there is a procedure for member state or the parliament to challenge harmonized standards, so-called formal objection procedure. Then what are the objectives of harmonized standards in the NLF? Well, first of all, the essential requirements which are given in the legislation, it should speed up technical harmonization and to avoid that the detailed discussions are taken by the legislator when setting the legislation. So the legislation can concentrate to essential requirements, which means that the legislative process should be faster than in situation where legislator should give a very detailed technical requirements in the legislation. Harmonized standards also, they allow smoother adaptation with changes in technical process. So there's no need to amend the legislation when the state of the art develops. So basically, standards should be reflected state of the art, and instead of that there is a need always to change the legislation. At least this is a theory. Sometimes I have followed the machinery directive very closely from the beginning, and sometimes it seems that also the legislation wants to put more technical requirements rather than always relying on the harmonized standards. So sometimes the reality is not according to the theory. Harmonized standards, they set a commonly agreed benchmark on compliance with harmonized with essential requirements, and they facilitate free movement of goods within the European Union, and then of course also reducing technical barriers. Harmonized standards, they should be based on a high level of safety, security, and environmental protection. And the requirements for drafting the standard should be given in the Commission standardization request, and harmonized standards should be then also assessed before they are cited in the OJEU, whether they fulfill these requirements. Then the last bullet point is that the regulation on European standardization, it also gives required transparency and including the requirements for the processes of requesting and drafting harmonized standards. Then some conclusions. Harmonized standards, they have a central role in the NLF-based legislation. Successful application, however, requires that the core principles are followed consistently. Although NLF is primary foreseen for the product legislation, there are also some cases where NLF or some of the principles of the NLF are used in other legislation. Applying some of the principles could be, of course, problematic if some of the parts of the NLF are missing. Like if the legislation doesn't give any essential requirements, it could be very challenging for the standardizers to draft harmonized standards. Of course, then there has to be Commission mandate, but even for the Commission, it could be challenging to put requirements in a mandate which originally should be found in the legislation. And then finally, I have also listed sources of more information, some of which were also in Federico's slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a small question for you. Who of you would agree that if you want to set good standards, it's important to bring together different stakeholders and work together to get those? Raise your hand if you agree with that statement. The majority of people. Good. So let me just quickly test your skill on that, as it seems to be important for you. So I'm going to ask you to pick somebody out of the room without letting them know that you picked them, and it can't be somebody that is sitting at your table. So maybe if you're at the front, you need to look a bit in the back. So pick a person that you identify here in the room. Can be somebody you secretly admire, potentially. You all have somebody, but don't let them know that you picked them. All right. Then I'll have 3 possible movements you can make. Either you raise 1 hand, either you raise 2 hands, or you raise no hands. Yeah, that's the possibility. So I'll count to 3. You'll raise 1, 2, or no hands, and then you'll look at the person that you identified, and you will follow what that person does. So if I have 2 hands in the air, and that other person has 1 hand in the air, I'll lower 1 hand. Yeah? And so you'll follow, and once you have the same, you stop. Yeah? If that person changes, you might need to change. You got it? Okay, so I'll count to 3, look at the person, and pick one of the 3 symbols, all down, 1 up or 2 up. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, keep on going, keep on going. And I think we have the 1-hand winners. Seems like there's a consensus on 1 hand. Let's do it one more time, just to get you in the routine. So pick another person, different person, pick a different person. Identify with what you're going to start. 2 hands up, 1 hand up, no hands up. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3, go. I still see some changes. I think hands down have won it this time. So what can we take from this exercise when it comes to stakeholder management? I have 3 things that I think could be useful. You need to look at each other and see what the other ones are doing, right? You need to pay attention. What is the Commission doing? What are the HAS consultants doing? What is industry doing? So you need to pay attention to what is going on with each other. You need to have an open mind to change. If there's a new legislation or there's a court case that impacts the work that you do, and you need to have the flexibility to also change your opinion. And then I must say I was quite surprised because my 3rd point was patience. It often doesn't go as quickly as you want it to go. But here that seems to be quite all right. So I think the speed of your working together seems to be okay. Let's see what we have next. We have another intervention from Federico Musso, and he will be joined as well by Catherine Vigneron, and they will speak to you about standardization requests. We'll have Federico Musso who starts, and then after we'll have Frédérique Vigneron.
So, this is the agenda. Yeah, well, the legal basis first, standardization request, formerly known as mandates. Since 2013, mandates is no longer a valid legal term. Well, Article 10 of the regulation, I mentioned before, it provides the whole basic process, from the specifically when it comes to standardization request, adoption, and then the first couple of paragraphs of these articles are the ones that regulate the process. Of course, very important is also Article 8, maybe less known to you. It's the Annual Union Work Program. Basically, the Commission cannot adopt a standardization request if it's not been mentioned in the Annual Union Work Program for that year, with only exceptions allowed in specifically and proven urgent cases. But the general rule, first Annual Union Work Program, then adoption of the standardization request. We have in some cases sectoral legislation which plays a role in the content and the issuing of standardization requests. And of course, I mentioned already before the vademecum, there we have some sort of practical details on the implementation. As I said, the vademecum is from 2015. Maybe a couple of points here and there could be updated, but broadly speaking, it's still a useful document. Okay, let's start by checking a little bit, what you know about standardization request. I have 3 questions, and you have to tell if these statements are right or wrong, true or false. So the first statement, this is where they have to provide the answer, right? I was afraid I had hit some wrong button. So going back to the first statement, well, a harmonized standards, a HAN, can be cited in the official journal, even if it's not explicitly listed in a valid standardization request or mandate in case of old. And of course, you have to say true or false. Okay, I see a clear trend here, and the trend is correct. I'm happy to see this trend because, and in fact, the question or the statement had 2 hidden elements. One, of course, it must be listed explicitly, so it must be covered by a standardization request, and the standardization request must be valid. If it has expired, we can no longer cite in the official journal, even if it was included in the initial mandate of standardization request. So I'm happy to see that so the second statement, via standardization requests, the Commission can only request harmonized standards. Okay, I see here the trend is more towards false, but very close call. The statement is false. The statement is false. In fact, we have an empowerment in the standardization regulation to ask whatever standardization document we need. Harmonized standards, European standards, technical specification, technical reports. In a couple of occasions, we even requested send guides, exceptionally. But basically, there is no limitation only to harmonized standards in what we can request formally to the ISOs. I think the last one. Well, the Commission needs to consult all 3 ISOs and all Annex 3 organizations, which are basically the representatives of societal stakeholders and SMEs in standardization, the selected representatives, before adopting each standardization request, even if the sector is outside of their expertise or field of activity. well, more than 100 votes, and here there is a trend. It is true, and it is correct. It is true. We have an obligation to consult every time we prepare a standardization request, all 3 ISOs and all societal stakeholders, even if we know already that some of them will not be interested or concerned by the standardization request. It's really an obligation in the law. And it's this element of inclusiveness and transparency that I was mentioned before. So the procedure from the Commission point of view, of course, Catherine will talk about the other side because it's a dynamic and interactive process, of course. Their responsibility remains with the sectoral services of the Commission, so the colleagues in charge of machinery, medical devices, construction, etc. So they are really the chef de file, as we say here, but in the lead. However, of course, my unit, the Standards Policy Unit, provide support to them. We explain the procedure, we have a number of tools to support them, we have the templates for standardization requests, and so on. And of course, we manage the Committee on Standards, which have to vote on the standardization request. We have a corporate template that is of mandatory use. Of course, it allows some adaptation to the specificities, but the template has been approved by our legal departments. And we have this obligation to consult, of course, the ISOs, the so-called societal stakeholders and SMEs, so the Annex 3 organizations that they are called, because they are basically selected on the basis of Annex 3 to the standardization regulation. And of course, also the sectoral expert group and committees, where usually member states and stakeholders sit for every piece of legislation, and also the regulations say other forms of consultation of sectoral experts. This is indeed the idea of the inclusive process before actually drafting the standardization request. We have, of course, this process it's open-ended. There is no deadline in the regulation, meaning that sometimes the consultation would drag on and also being quite unstructured. So maybe you think you have closed the consultation and in the very end, we forgot to talk about this. We forgot this element. And so basically in the task force, you might have heard the Commission and the ISOs have created a task force 2.5 years ago to work on trying to find, solution to eliminate bottlenecks in the process. We came up with a joint checklist. So basically, this is used now in the consultation between us and the ISOs. So they are sure we check all the boxes, and so all elements have been clarified, discussed at the moment in which we move on with the finalization of the process. This is a typical Brussels jargon. It does not exist in English, but it's a very common word here, comitology, meaning basically secondary legislation, secondary act adopted via a vote in the committee, where of course the member states representative sits. So it does not go to the parliament, does not go to the council. It's only for secondary legislation. In the past, as I said, we could adopt a mandate without further ado. Now there is we need the approval of the member states. If the member states give a negative vote, we cannot adopt the standardization request. And this vote happens via the so-called comitology procedure. Basically, once we have finalized the consultation with the ISOs and the other stakeholders, we have an internal inter-service consultation so that all concerned departments in the Commission can validate or make comments on the standardization request. We have a sort of public consultation, so we have a web page managed by my unit where we publish in parallel all draft standardization requests. After we have a final version validated internally, we have to translate it to French and German, mandatory, and then we launch the vote. We launch the vote in the Committee on Standards, and this comitology vote, in most cases, happens via written procedures, so there is no need for an actual meeting. Once it is voted, this is very important, it's not always clear to the external stakeholders, we can no longer change. Once we have a positive vote from the member states, we can no longer change any part. A typo can be corrected, but on substance we can make no changes, otherwise we have to go back to the committee for another vote. And then it must be adopted by the College of Commissioners, so Ms. von der Leyen and her peers, it's really that level of adoption. At that moment, once it is adopted, it's sent to the relevant ISOs for their acceptance. So they have this is also stated in the law. The ISOs, from the moment of receiving it, have 1 month for accepting it. If they don't, within 1 month, this standardization request is dead. All the process must be restarted from scratch. Acceptance, and this is also, must be full. So we had cases in the past where, yeah, I accept it, but not this part. Some users will say, no, acceptance is either full or not. So this acceptance is unconditional. And of course, if accepted within 1 month, then it becomes valid, and it can indeed, of course, be the legal basis later for the work and for the citation in the official journal. Until expiration, of course, because now we always have expiration date. If there is a need, same formal procedure must be followed, but of course in an amendment, it's usually a little bit faster, all the consultations. So it's usually 6-7 months, an amendment can be done to change the deadline, to add a standard, whatever. Final point, it's really important, I mentioned before, annual union work program. This is a prerequisite. In order to adopt a standardization request, it must normally be mentioned in an annual union work program for that year in which we want to adopt it. That's the importance of the annual union work program. It's the necessary legal basis to adopt a standardization request. My unit plays a coordinating role inside the Commission to get the input from all Commission services in terms of which standardization request they would think of adopting, so we collect them. Now, since we introduced the high-level forum on standardization, you might have heard of it since the strategy was adopted. Also, the member states, the stakeholder, the political, they can all provide input, suggestions. And once adopted and published, the annual union work program is available. Actually, we find all the past also annual union work programs. They are publicly available in this web page. Just one misunderstanding, just to kill one possible misassumption. Rolling plan for ICT standardization, very important document, but no legal basis for adoption of standardization request. It must be in the annual union work program. If something is mentioned in the rolling plan only, it's not sufficient. The execution, I mentioned before, Article 10.5, Article 10.6, this is a different part. This is once the standardization request is in place and is a basis for work. And then, of course, we have the assessment of draft standards, the citation in the official journal. This comes at the end of the process. I think this is now your part. So.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Catherine. I work in the Science and Management Center, and it's my pleasure now to present you the standardization request from our perspective, from the Science and perspective. So to start with, and just to be sure that you have listened to Federico very carefully, let's test your knowledge, or let's say your first impression about standardization requests. So first question, the European Commission cannot adopt a standardization request without consulting the ESOs. Let's wait. Okay, it seems that you have listened to Federico carefully. That's good news. So yes, indeed it is true, and you see that later in my slides, that indeed the European Commission has to consult the standardization organization during the development process of a standardization request. The second question, and this is also a point that has been mentioned earlier, a standardization request can be adopted even if member states vote against. True, false, This is more balanced. Let's see. I will stop here because I'm also conscious about the time. So indeed, it is false. Member states need to be in favor of this standardization request, or needs to be positively voted by the member states before being delivered to the ESOs. And the last question, this is more for our technical committees, guys in the room, and ladies in the rooms. Within SENESEC, the acceptance of or the rejection of a standardization request is decided by the technical committees. Let's see. And yeah, I believe I will stop here. Also, yes, this is indeed false, and I will show you and explain you later. But basically, just to already tell you that in fact standardization requests are approved by the members of SENESEC and not by the technical committees. So now I will use this thing just to recap what has been said by Federico. This is, in fact, the development process of a standardization request, but in a picture. And what I'm going to focus on is the drafting and consultation of the ESOs and Annex 3 organization. Why? It's because this is exactly where the input of the technical committees and SENEC members is super important. I'll explain you why. This is the explanation, but how we are organizing ourselves when SENEC receive a draft standardization request. The first thing SENEC do is establishing a SHRAG, a very nice acronym, and you might have heard about this wonderful acronym very often. A SHRAG means Standardization Request Ad Hoc Group. What is this? This is a group established by the SENT and or SENELEC technical boards, the technical boards being the highest governing body for technical matters within SENT and SENELEC. So the technical boards established a SHRAG, which is in fact a short-term group responsible for the coordination and for the input and for commenting the draft standardization request. Why? It's because when we receive a draft, the Commission has to consult SENEC. We are organizing ourselves. We gather comments and content, or let's say comments, and we send it back to the European Commission. So this is the task of this group, standardization request ad hoc group. The task is indeed look at the standardization request, comment, but comment on why? Comment on the content of the draft standardization request, comment also on the feasibility. Do we have the experts? Is it feasible within the time frame? Are the experts available, or do we lack experts? Do we have a technical body who is ready to take the standardization request on board? This is super important, and this phase is super critical for the SENEC membership, experts and technical committees. So this group has also to flag any issue, and more important than that, this group is also responsible for delivering an advice to the SENEC technical boards the day we receive the official standardization request. Because indeed, as I've just said a few minutes ago, it's up to the SENEC technical board to approve a standardization request. So this group is a super important group. They are really, let's say, providing or helping in the drafting, in the drafting of the standardization request, and very important to also to mention that we all want the same. The European Commission, as well as SENEC members, really want a standardization request which is acceptable and which is really a document which is agreed upon. This is super important. So therefore, just to come back on this, no, I cannot go back, but okay. On 2 slides before, during this drafting phase, the SENEC contribution is super important. So now a question you may ask is, okay, who's around this table of this SHRAG, standardization request ad hoc group? In fact, our technical boards, when having a draft, they call for this group, and we call to our members, the 34 SENEC members, to appoint experts. We also contact the technical bodies we believe are following or falling under the scope of the draft standardization request. And we also call to our partners, including the Annex 3 organization, to join this SHRAG. No, maybe not, but and this group is really needs to provide contents. They have online meetings. The secretariat of this group is held by us, the SENEC Management Center, and usually the chairmanship, or let's say the lead of this group, which is a temporary group, is usually led by, let's say, the main TCs, the main technical committees on the topic. When they have discussed the content of the draft standardization request, we compile the comment and then we send it back to the European Commission or to the, let's say, the unit in charge of the matter at the European Commission. After that depends whether our comments are acceptable or not by the European Commission, then they can start a round of discussion, of exchanges with the European Commission. But as said, from the European Commission side as well as from SENEC, the goal is really to have an agreed document on the matter. Because although it made no sense. And of course, the more we discuss and the more we agree, the more there is the probability that SENEC will accept the standardization request. Typical structure of a standardization request, I will not be very logical, but I will start with the annex. The annex of a standardization request, in fact, contains the list of the requested standards and their deadlines for which the Commission expects us to deliver the standards, of course. This is relatively precise, and it's very important to be sure that all the topics the TC believes need to be covered, are mentioned, that the deadlines are feasible, that we don't miss anything, that maybe, I don't know, an EN might be in the meantime being obsolete. This is the kind of thing that really needs to be checked, whether the title is correct, this kind of thing. So this is in the annex of the standardization request, and you have an example here. Now, coming back to the core text of the standardization request, there is always a request from the European Commission to send and select to develop a work program, relatively precise, that needs to be usually given a sent back to the Commission 2 or 3 months after the reception of the notification, of the standardization request. And in fact, it's to explain how we're going to do, how send and select are going to deliver the standard, by when, by which technical committee, etc. This is really the project plan of the standardization request. Another thing is the reporting. This is also very important. In each standardization request, there is an obligation for send and select to report annually on the progress around the standardization request. This is really the time where we need to see, okay, or need to say, okay, we are on time, we are not on time. We mentioned in the work program that we would be ready, I don't know, by January 2026, but in fact, more likely we will be ready by, or we will deliver the EN by March 2026. This is super important to communicate as soon as we know, as soon as we can, on each, I don't know, issue or good news or whatever, to the European Commission through the annual report. This is something we take on board or we trigger. I mean, when I say we, I mean the Sensorec Management Center. But we are doing this also, I mean, of course, in cooperation with the technical committee. So when we are close to the deadline, we'll contact the technical committees, saying, hey, my friend, where are you with your standards? Don't forget that we need to report to the European Commission. Another thing is the validity of the standardization request. This is super important, because we will not be able to offer standards for citation if the date of the standardization request is expired. So super important to keep that in mind. But here again, don't worry, the Sensorec Management Center will contact you and say, hey, dear technical committees, where are you? But this is of course something we monitor through the annual report to be sure that our technical committees respect the deadlines. I also wish to come back to something that I mentioned earlier. Of course, we organize ourselves in standardization request ad hoc group to comment on the draft standardization request. These groups are temporary groups. Why? It's because these groups are there to comment the standardization request, but when the standardization request is there, of course, the work is allocated to technical committees, and technical committees are really those responsible to deliver the requested standards by the deadlines. Of course, we expect that those concerned technical committees are part of the SHRAGs. So that's why it's super important that you are well aware that each time there is a draft, it's super important to be there to comment and to already raise your point, if any, during the SHRAG, because you know that this will fall on your technical committee's desk sooner or later. Another thing that which is not on the slides, I said it's not up to the technical committees to agree or to approve or to reject the standardization request. It's up to the members of Sensorec. Therefore, the connections with your members is super important as well. And that's why the SHRAG is really giving advice to the technical board so that the connection between all the experts, the members, etc., is ensured. I believe that this is my last slide, but before pushing the button, I'll just make sure. This is the full process, and this is why we are here today, is to discuss this full process. So we have the standardization requests you see there, and we are there at the moment explaining how we are organizing ourselves with the standardization request. I believe this is my last slide. Yes, I thank you for your attention, and of course I'm available for any question later or even now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope that gave you some clearer insight into the process. At least I saw with the different Mentimeters that some misunderstandings were clarified for some people, so at least there was already some learning going on. We will follow up with another speaker and we'll have a break at 10:30, so you can already start looking to that as well. But keep your focus for our next two speakers. The first one is Gabriella Sestini, and she's a policy officer at the European Commission, also at DG Grow H3.
Thank you very much, Sven. Okay, I need to understand. Now it should work. Yeah. Oh, voila. Good morning, everyone, here in the room and online. It's a pleasure to be here. We heard with Catherine and with Federico and Are what it happens before, and now we see the citation of the Harmonized standards on the official journal. Because the standards, they achieve the legal relevance when they are published in the official journal. The publication, that is also called citation or referencing, you will see different synonyms. So the publication of the Harmonized standards triggers the presumption of conformity. Manufacturers applying the standard can assume that they are acting in compliance with the corresponding requirements of the EU legislation. So actually the citation in the OJEU links the standards to the EU legislation. And the standardization regulation states clearly at Article 10, paragraph 6, that when a harmonized standard satisfies the requirements which it aims to cover and which are set out in the corresponding union harmonization legislation, the Commission should publish the reference in the official journal. How this, yeah. Sorry, but, voila. How this happen? Let's see the process of the citation, how it is executed. I prepared these schematic slides to summarize all the different phases. I hope you can read it well. Once a standard is finalized and satisfies the essential requirements it intends to cover, the ESOs, the European Standardization Organization, they offer the standard for citation to the Commission. Ideally, the standard offered received a positive HAS assessment. We will see what it is indeed afterwards. But there is no automatism. Yes, because the Commission is not bound by the result of compliance assessment by the HAS, but must verify various aspects before deciding if to publish or not a standard. If the Commission decides to publish it, then it prepares an act because the citation of standards in the OJEU follows a very structured legal procedure, as there is a political validation by the College of Commissioners. So it is done via a Commission implementing decision. So the Commission drafts the act and consult all the concerned services. It is called an inter-service consultation. Certainly, it will consult the SecGen and the legal service. And then, for example, DG Connect, the Joint Research Center, DG Justice and Consumers, Sante, Health, depending on the standards contained in the Act. Yes, because to make the most of the administrative times for the adoption of an implementing act, it is always preferable to group several standards into one act. Once the final act this implementing act then goes in this inter-service consultation, and once all the comments from the concerned services are received, they need to be addressed. And the final version of this act is ready, is prepared. And it is submitted to the college for the adoption, and then it is published in the official journal in the L series. It must be noted that, in fact, this process is applicable since December 2018, because before the publication of harmonized standards was done via a communication published in the C series of the OJEU. Since then, the list of standards that were already published under different legislation were transferred from the C series to the L series with the first main act. That's why the first adoption, the first step, is this one main commission implementing decision. The subsequent modifications to the list are effectuated by means of an amendment to the main act, actually to the annexes of the main act. Yeah. Here you have an example of an amendment to the annex to the main act to insert new references. And you can see from the screenshot that the modification concerns the Annex 1. And you can see also that there are new rows inserted to include new references of standards. The publication can concern a complete standard, or we can have a citation with restriction. What it means that only a part of a standard, a clause, it is reference to give the presumption of conformity. So partial citation is also called. And since the list of standards in the OJ must be kept up to date, there is the necessity to remove all the references from the official journal. And it is done with a similar procedure for the citation, but the amendment to the main act will concern the Annex 2, for example, for the LVD, the Annex 2 to the main act, to remove the references of obsolete standards. And in order to give manufacturers enough time to adapt their products that are covered by the withdrawn standards, it can be necessary to defer the date of the withdrawal. Generally, it is deferred of 18 months. The implementing decision enters into force on the day of its publication, and compliance with the harmonized standard confers the legal effect of a presumption of conformity from the date of publication of the reference in the official journal. My colleague Caterina will explain more in detail the presumption of conformity, but here I would just like to underline some main principles to remember. So the legal effect of a cited harmonized standard is limited to the essential requirements actually covered by it. And there is no legal effect for requirements that are not indicated in the relevant legislation. To take an easy and obvious example, if a standard is about ignition propensity of cigarettes, it addresses the main risks associated with the fire safety requirements. It is not at all related to the content of nicotine or else that it is covered by other standards and other EU legislation. The standard must not be ambiguous on this, and hence there is the need to underline here the importance of the Annex Z, that it is a correlation table, correlation list, to facilitate the reading of the standard and the application of a standard. I don't know if Sven, there was the time to put the Menti question. Oh, No, apparently, yes? Okay. Then we go with this question to you. In your opinion, how many references of harmonized standards are currently published in the official journal of the European Union? You have still a few seconds to reply. Yeah. Yes, really a lot. The correct answer is 3,600 around. You correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. And it is important, therefore, to know well where to find the list of cited standards in the official journal. You can find it in the DigiGrow website, where colleagues take very good care to maintain the list up to date. There are consolidated lists in all the languages, classified under sectors, and you can find them in the Excel or PDF form. So really you have everything you need to find what you're looking for. And then, of course, you can find the list in the Eurolex, that is the portal for the access to the official journal. Here I put for you, as example, the link to the LVD list. Then, of course, in the official journal, you need to know the decision that was adopted, the main act, as we saw, and then all the different amendments. A consolidated list may be also provided by the publication office of the Commission, purely as a documentation tool, so there is no legal effect. I need to hurry because I have only 1 minute left, but based on the answer given to the Menti questions, I see that the audience is heterogeneous and maybe there are less experts today in the public that may appreciate this little explanation. How to understand the list of cited standards, harmonized standards, which sequential order do they follow, and what is the meaning of the references? Those references can be compared to the cartouche given to the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, because if someone does not know the system, it can be tricky to read what is the standard, what it is about. So maybe we all know EN stands for European norm. And then there is the number attributed to the standard. If a standard is composed of more than one part and each part forms a separate document, there is indicated the number of the part. And then there is the year of the adoption of the standard by the ESOs, and if the standard has been corrected or modified, you have also the AC for corrigendum or A for amendment 1 or 2 with the year of this correction. And if you have the plus between the number of the main standard and the corrigendum or the amendment, it means that it is a consolidated version. The document includes the main standard plus the modification, so it's easier to read it. If you have a slash, this is only the corrigendum or the amendment. And here I have examples of lists. This in the screen is a consolidated list prepared by the publication office of the Commission. You can see that the order is descending according to the number attributed to the standard, so regardless of the year or the part number. And if you see ISO or IC after the EN is of course a standard developed at international level that has been transposed in the European system. I just jumped these slides. Oops, I lost a sheet, but this is the end of my presentation, and here the key takeaways I wish to give to the audience. The process of citation, where to find the latest list, and how to understand the list. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are going to go back to you now, to maybe questions or statements you have for the European Commission. And if our colleagues can bring up the Mentimeter, there you go, and the QR code. You can fill in freely here in this Mentimeter your feedback to the European Commission. We have heard some speakers already from the Commission. There will be some more afterwards. But what would be your feedback on this topic to the European Commission at this time? We are not going to go through them right here, but they will be passed on to the Commission and they will take a look at them as well. So take a bit of time and see what message can you share to the Commission. And the tone is set with a thank you for coffee. It helps them as well to give maybe some answers to reflections that you have. And we can remove the QR code, Mara. So, quite clear for many people. Thanks. Still a need to simplify the process. It's useful for some people. This is the basics. Clear presentations, good introduction to a complex process. Speak a bit slower, please. There's a lot of information that has been given. Nice and short presentations. Also from online, great webinar, well done. Recording, make it available, and the slide as a PDF. Recommending 3 pages with space for notes. That's a clear suggestion. Good introduction. Again, from online, make sure you speak in the microphone, dear speakers. Don't go too fast with QR codes, so maybe Mara, you can show them again. Thanks for the online access. Thanks for the start. And somebody appreciates the consistency of the process and the involved organizations. It's also dynamic, very informative, however many presentations feel rushed. It's difficult to keep up, so really try and focus on what is the most important message that you want to communicate. We know there's quite a lot to go through today. Make visualizations of the processes. That's a tip. We could help with that. I think Joyce maybe has drawn up some processes. We'll show it after the break. Where is Etsy representative? Is there an Etsy representative here in the room? No? So they are missing, maybe online. Would be good to speak about the delays and the Haas consultant process too. Make sure ISO and IEC standards add EU legislation and send EU representatives to the IEC ISO working group. The evaluation by Haas consultants remains a bottleneck. This is particularly critical as we are at a time of significant regulatory change. Would it be possible to reduce the complexity from identifying a need to a standard may take ages and the EU market will be stuck? No need to speak about the past, let's speak about the future. So those are some of the comments that you in the room and the people online have been giving. This question will stay open, so you can still add some stuff, and we will pass this to the lovely people from the Commission who will go through it thoroughly. Some questions, some thanks about the clarity, and for some people, at least this seems to be helpful to clarify the process. We have one more speaker before the break, and I would like to invite Katharina Nohel on stage, and she will speak about the presumption of conformity and what it means. Welcome.
Could I just ask you which one is the one to click? The bottom one or the upper one? Okay, fantastic. Okay. So good morning. It might seem that the seminar's objective has been reached, as colleagues have already explained, the journey from the legal framework to I beg your pardon, from the journey from the legal framework citation to the citation, as we have already heard Gabri on the citation, but we still have prepared one more presentation for you before the coffee break. I will be short. I have only 5 slides for you, 3 of them textual, 2 of them visual, so I hope it will be understandable and fairly short introduction to the not so easy concept of the presumption of conformity. So that's the first slide, where I'd like to introduce to you the concept of the presumption of conformity. I think colleagues have already alluded to it. And let's start with defining the concept. As you may know, it's a legal concept within the EU legal framework, which makes the products, services, or processes which comply with harmonized standards automatically presumed to meet the essential requirements or to conform to the relevant EU legislation. As you understand, the purpose of all this concept is to simplify market access to the single market and to reduce the burden on the manufacturers of going through multiple conformity assessment processes. So the objective of introducing this presumption of conformity in the new legislative framework had been that manufacturers may voluntarily comply with harmonized standards to demonstrate conformity of products with essential requirements. Where do we find the legal foundations of this concept? It's our standardization regulation, 1025 from year 2012. Then it's the new legislative framework you probably have heard of already today. And then it's, of course, the list of the harmonized standards which had been developed by the recognized European Standardization Organization, the SENS, NLEC, and ETSI, which had been just mentioned by colleagues in the chat. Where you find a list of the reference standards published in the OJEU had been in detail described by Gabriela, but I'll just copy it in the link for the sake of the presentation. If you wanted perhaps a bit more information on the presumption of conformity concept, you may also refer to the so-called Blue Book, which is a communication from the Commission, which is regularly updated. The latest update is from 2022. So there you can refer to yourselves for not only, of course, the presumption of conformity. When we were defining what the presumption of conformity is, we have seen that the presumption of conformity asks for certain correspondence or coherence between the harmonized standard and the so-called essential requirements. So let us look in more detail into what the essential requirements are. So the essential requirements are the criteria which are specified in the EU law, which could be regulations, directive, and that are the criteria which the products, processes, or services which are placed on the EU market must meet to ensure public interest. And by public interest, we usually understand safety, health, or environmental protection. And I have listed for your understanding a few examples. So it could be safety requirements for electric equipment, environmental standards for emissions, or health standards for consumer products. The legal framework, again, as it's a legal concept, is to be found in the harmonization legislation, which, as you have been certainly told, is listing the essential requirements rather than describing in full the technical requirements that the product, services, processes need to bear. So all the various EU regulations or directives are the legal basis for these essential requirements. And of course, the advantage of having these essential requirements laid down in the legislation is that once a manufacturer complies with these essential requirements, then he's sure and complies with them, he's sure to be on the right side and can be sure to legally play, or can be assured to legally place its products on the EU market. So far, so good. The concept might seem fairly simple, so I prepared a picture for you to perhaps illustrate it a bit better. So we have the essential requirements, which are mandatory and founded and laid down in the EU legislation. That's why you have the star. And then you have the magic, if I may say, of the harmonized standards, which respond to these essential requirements by prescribing the technical requirements. And that is what I would like to stress, only for those essential requirements which are laid down in the EU registration can we talk about the presumption of conformity. So for the group of essential requirements in EU legislation, the socket, you have the plug, which are those parts of the harmonized standards which are presumed to conform to the EU legislation. So you've heard already how harmonized standards are developed and what are the prerequisites for the presumption of conformity, so I will not repeat that, but I will show you how is this translated then again into written text and into sort of a legal foundation, if I may say so. And Gabriela has already alluded to it. It's the famous Annex Z, which is, I have drafted an example on the slide, which is the correlation table between the essential requirements, so between the socket, and then between the solution of which you have found which you have foreseen and developed in the harmonized standard. So it's these parts in the corresponding tables which are presumed to conform to the EU legislation. But of course, things are of course complex, because you would have a harmonized standard which does not usually cover only the essential requirements. So you could have a standard with multiple attributions, but the concept of presumption of conformity would always be centered only to the essential requirements which are mandatory by EU law. So to make it clear, there is a difference between whether you are saying a product is compliant with a standard, even a harmonized standard, or it's compliant with the essential requirements of the EU law. Then let's look at this from the perspective of a manufacturer. This picture is, or this image is taken from the Blue Book, to which I have referenced to you before, so it's really useful. There are some images, it's instructive, so please don't hesitate. A lot of effort had been put into development of this Commission communication. So if you were a manufacturer and wanted to place your new product in the EU market, then you would have to undergo what is called a risk assessment, whereby you would identify what are the essential requirements your product needs to meet, and what are the risks to which the product has to be responding to. Those are the public risks, the public safety, health, environmental risk I was mentioning earlier. So once you do your analysis, you come to the second column, and you see that, okay, to my product, essential requirement 1, 3, and 7 apply. So then you pose yourself, you ask yourself a question. So how do I ensure that my product, which I want to market in the EU, is going to be legally placed on the market? And then you look for the standards which are applicable, and you would find that for some essential requirements, you would like to use the harmonized standards. And for those essential requirements, your product will, and if, of course, you apply it correctly and fully, and you have the technical evidence for that, your product would be presumed to conform to the essential requirements of the EU legislation. On the other hand, for some of the essential requirements, you would probably or possibly apply a different standard, which is not a harmonized standard. So a standard which has been not done based on a standardization request from the Commission, which hasn't been voted on, which hasn't been published. You can use it as a manufacturer, of course, to prove the essential requirement, but you would not have this sort of automatic presumption of conformity. Which brings me to the last slide, to show you what the legal effect, and I would even say benefits of the standardization framework and of this concept of presumption of conformity is. So we've been already saying that the legal effect of presumption of conformity in the EU law is that products, services, or processes that adhere to the harmonized standards are automatically presumed to comply with the relevant essential requirements laid down in the EU directives or regulation. This presumption has several important implications, and I have listed out 5, but of course you can probably find some more. So for the first one, which I'd like to mention, it's the legal certainty. And that's, of course, the atout for the system, that the businesses and manufacturers gain legal certainty and clarity regarding the requirements they need to meet, thus reducing the risk of non-compliance. With that, hand in hand, goes the compliance, which ensures for the consumer and for the market a high level of safety and performance within the single market. It simplifies the concept of the presumption of conformity, simplifies the compliance process for manufacturers by, again, providing a clear path to demonstrate conformity with EU legislation. Then, if you allow me, I jump to the 4th, which is clearly linked to that one, and it's very important to manufacturers or other businesses placing products, processes, services on the EU market, is the question of the burden of proof. Because if you are certain that you have applied as a manufacturer with the essential requirements through correctly applying the harmonized standards to the essential requirements, then the burden of proof, if anyone were to challenge you, stating that your product does not meet the required qualities, the burden of proof would shift to the national authorities, and they would have to put themselves in the difficult situation of really showing you that you have failed in your assessments and in following the harmonized standards. So that is, of course, very advantageous for the manufacturers, and if you were ever in litigation, you would certainly agree with me. Then another advantage of this concept is the ease of market access, which is, of course, what we want. And then the 5th one, to conclude quickly, is the regulatory confidence, where the national market surveillance authorities can rely on the concept of presumption of conformity as an indication of compliance, and thus, again, enhancing the efficiency of regulatory enforcement. And with this, that was my last slide. I know the coffee break is just around the corner, but perhaps let me just recap the two elements I would like for you to take away from this short intervention, and that is that the harmonized standards are the basis of the standardization system, in the sense that only the harmonized standards have this legal effect of presumption of conformity. And then the second is much more practical, and that's the importance of Annex Z, which you will probably, some of you working on the standards will be asked to prepare. And this is the annex which really clearly shows the correspondence between the EU law and the standard which had been developed. And this is where the concept of legal, of presumption of conformity would sit. So, thank you so much for your attention, and I think it will be off for the break.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. That's it for our first block of the morning. You will have a coffee break to digest the info, but also, as Chinjia mentioned in the beginning, to meet and mingle. I will start back at 11:05, 11:05, and I hope that you will be here then as well. See you after the break. It's 5:05, and I promised to start at 5:05, so I will do that. There were two questions popping up during the Mentimeter for the Commission, and I thought maybe I can help already a little bit. Yeah? And so I asked. There was one of the questions was, how can we reduce the complexity? And so. What do you do in 2024 when you are confronted with a difficult question? You ask ChatGPT. So I have the answer for you. It's quite simple. It's only 4 points. You need to reduce bureaucratic layers. That's one. Ensure that regulations are clear and uniform. Encourage stakeholder engagement and harmonize standards with international norms to reduce redundancies. Voilà, that's the answer. Should be quick to realize, no? I agree. So that's the answer of ChatGPT to that question. And secondly, there was also a question, could you visualize this a little bit more? And so during the break, we have tried to do that. And if we can just bring up the work of my colleague Joyce, who was trying to capture some of the key elements of the presentations that we had. If you can bring up the visuals, that would be really handy. Voila, so that's the first one, which talks about the new legislation framework as opposed to the new approach, creating a public-private partnership, criteria for citation in the official journal of the EU, and necessary to support European policies. There's a guidance document, assessments of conformity, execution of standardization requests, and there was also a contribution about, or an input about the James Elliott judgment and what were the consequences of that. Then we moved on to the second one, the role and objectives of harmonized standards. The hands have a central role in the NLF-based legislation. The role of harmonized standards, market surveillance, notified bodies, toolbox for future legislation and accreditation of conformity. The objectives: to speed up, to make the adaptation smoother, based on high level of safety, security, and I think environmental standards were also mentioned, and hence set commonly agreed benchmarks. We move on to the standardization requests. The Commission officials initiate and manage. There's a standardization request, and then there's a consultation phase, which is followed by a jointly developed checklist. That leads to a draft EU standard, and that is then published in the official journal of the EU. And we also had this very creative abbreviation, the SRAG, which was the Standardization Request Ad Hoc Group, who deals with some of these requests. Moving on, the citation of hence in the official journal of the EU. The harmonized standards, if satisfied, the Commission shall publish a reference. It's important to understand the list of cited hence, and we got a nice explanation based also with some hieroglyphs and one main commission of implementing the decision plus annexes, and then the amendments also come after that. And I think there's one more, the presumption of conformity. The goal is to simplify market, or one of the goals is to simplify market access, comply with the essential requirements, will help with that, and manufacturers may voluntarily comply with these standards. What is the effect of that? Legal certainty, compliance, market access, the burden of proof, and regulatory confidence. That's very quickly, very briefly an overview. And there was a request for some visualization, so we have it here. Joyce will continue with that also in the second part of this morning. I have one more request from the audience, and that's for the speakers to speak clearly and also make sure that you keep your face directed to the audience, because if you turn around, the people don't hear you very well on the microphone. So the next speakers, try and focus on the microphones, and you have your slides on the screen in front of you. That could help. So what's next? Our next speaker is Frederik Mlanau. He's the account manager of Sen and Senelec, and he will talk about the key principles of innovative processes for homegrown harmonized standards and the preparation of harmonized standards in the international context. Frederik, where are you? Ah, there you are. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this seminar today. Very happy to have you here in Brussels, and for those online, yeah, thanks. Thank you for joining us. So we will talk, after talking earlier about the legal framework and all the rules to know for developing a harmonized standard, for the second half of the morning, we will focus on the process, on processes, plural. We will see how to draft harmonized standards, the interactions later with EY and the HAS consultant, and as well we will give some drafting guidance. Gonzalo will take care of it. So, yeah, the agenda for my part. I will focus on key principles for the new innovative process for homegrown harmonized standard, and the second part will be dedicated to the preparation of harmonized standard in the international context, because most of the standards in machinery and health are developed at international level. This slide is about glossary. There you will find all the abbreviations used today. I will not go through it, but it can be helpful for you later when you review the slides and the presentation. First, the key principle of the new process for harmonized standard, for homegrown harmonized standards. So, as Shinzia mentioned this morning, and as my colleagues from EY will mention later, it's still challenging today to get a compliant assessment outcome. Therefore, the innovative process, the new innovative process was designed and approved to address that challenge, and the goal of this process is to improve the timely delivery of compliant harmonized standards. This new process is based on two main pillars. The first pillar is the mature draft concept. Here, the idea is to shift the focus and the efforts at the beginning of the development process instead of waiting the end where you are blocked and you can, most of the time, no longer address the comments from the HAS consultant. So mature draft concept, the mature draft is a draft that is ready to be circulated for the inquiry ballot. The mature draft assessment becomes now mandatory. There used to be the first working draft assessment that was optional. The first working draft is still possible. The circulation of the first working draft is still possible, but the mature draft assessment is mandatory. Second pillar is a novelty in this process is the CCMC quality check. The goal of the quality check is to help technical bodies address issues in the draft or eventually in the annexes that could potentially lead to a lack of compliant assessment. This new step is key in the process, and as well it participates to the fact that we shift the focus and the efforts at the beginning of the process. The CCMC quality check most of the time is performed by my colleagues Mauro and Anda that are sitting at the back of the room. They are doing the checks, and so if you have questions about quality checks, please go to them. This is the complete new process. I wish I could turn my head to explain you, but I will not do it. So the first part of the process, you see the quality check and the first assessment, A1, that is the major draft assessment. Then during the inquiry phase, you have the ballot. If you have a lack of compliant assessment on the major draft assessment, you can have an inquiry confirmatory assessment. I will come back to that. For the formal vote part, same principle. Another quality check on the formal vote draft, and then the formal vote assessment before the editing phase. You see a grayed area, the A4 box. This is the optional last confirmatory assessment, only possible if you have a lack of compliance at formal vote. Let's say everything goes smoothly, you have a compliant assessment, it goes through, there's a positive vote. At formal vote, the standard is made available, offered for citation to the European Commission, and finally cited in the official journal, and you get all the benefits that we talked about earlier this morning. The new steps. I want to focus on this slide because here you have the timing for the new steps. So the CCMC quality check, as said, is the first step now in the development. This is mandatory. And when we receive a request from the TC to perform the quality check, CCMC has 3 weeks to perform the quality check and to deliver the quality check report. Once the quality check report received, the technical body has 4 weeks to address the comments from the quality check. Important element, comments related to internal regulations part 3 and normative references shall be addressed by the technical body. And during the quality check, we focus mainly on that. We don't focus on technical content, we only focus on horizontal aspect because we are not HAS consultant, and the HAS consultants that are here have the technical knowledge to address that. When you are ready with the updated draft and annexes, you come back to us, to CCMC, for us to request the HAS assessment. Then we go to EY for the assessment. Then normally it should be delivered, the assessment report should be delivered within 5 weeks. When we have the assessment report, we send a notification to the technical body so that they can check the assessment report and work on the draft and the annexes to address the comments from the HAS consultant. Once all is done, the technical body comes back to CCMC so that we can proceed with the inquiry ballot or the formal vote ballot. Very important elements here. It's important to anticipate. The work group has to anticipate anticipate for organizing the meetings. Sorry, the working group meetings before requesting the quality check and before requesting the HAS assessment. We know it's challenging sometimes to convene everyone, so before requesting the quality check, please anticipate on the meeting with the working group. Same thing when requesting a HAS assessment. Do it, plan it before requesting it. Another very important element, for the quality check and the HAS assessment to be requested, we need all the documents. It means the drafts and as well the European annexes. It was mentioned this morning by our colleague from the European Commission. Without Annex Z, there's no assessment request possible, and before the assessment request, there's no quality check possible. If you make a quality check request without an Annex Z, this will be rejected. So to save time, we encourage you to start preparing all the related annexes early in the development, together with the development of the draft. And as well, very important, the common checklist, together with the annexes, shall be sent to CCMC for the quality check. Here, it's the message is about the common checklist. That is absolutely mandatory, so you know when drafting a harmonized standard and before making an assessment request or a CCMC quality check, the technical body shall perform a self-assessment. using the new common checklist that was developed 1 year ago within the ESO's EC's task force. This new common checklist is mandatory for the technical bodies. They shall perform a self-assessment on their draft using this common checklist. The same checklist will be used for the CCMT quality check, and the very same template is used by the HAS consultants when performing the HAS assessment. So very important, from the very beginning, use the common checklist for your self-assessment. Quality check, I will go quickly because time is running. So again, the quality check, we perform it only on the mature draft and on the pre-formal vote draft. New common checklist, mandatory. Here you have a link to a webinar we organized on the new common checklist. And again, during the quality check, we focus on elements related to internal regulations part 3, normative references, and Annex Z, but for the Annex Z, we mostly focus on the template. We check if you have used the right template for your draft, for your document. When to request an assessment, so we saw in the timeline for developing a harmonized standard, you have the possibility of having 4 assessments. First assessment that is now mandatory, the mature draft assessment. If you receive a lack of compliant assessment on the mature draft, that will be most probably the case, you can request an inquiry confirmatory assessment. We call it confirmatory because it's a way to confirm that you have addressed the comments from the HAS consultant on the mature draft assessment. Then if the formal vote is not skipped, you have the pre-formal vote assessment that is mandatory. And if the pre-formal vote assessment receives a lack of compliant assessment, there's a possibility to have a last confirmatory assessment, but we hope that it will be exceptional now that we start the process earlier, and we will probably have the opportunity to address all the comments before the pre-formal vote. So important to know, there's a maximum of 4 assessments per work item during the development, and when a work item is made available, when it is published, it's not possible to request an assessment on it. It's only the European Commission who could request a final assessment before citing the document in the official journal. Useful links for you to know. So we will share the presentations at the end of the seminar. So here, 2 useful links for a webinar dedicated to the new common checklist and another one dedicated to the new process for homegrown harmonized standard, where we go deep in the nitty-gritty details of the process. So we invite you to follow that to have more details about that. Now, moving on to the preparation of harmonized standard in the international context, very important element because, again, most of the standards in machinery and health are developed at international level. I will start with a question. Do you know what is the proportion of harmonized standards that are identical to ISO publication? And I'm talking about ISO publication, so it's the Vienna Agreement, just for you to... Yeah. I see a trend. Okay, maybe we can stop because time is running. So I see most of the people choose around 40%. It's true, it's not 11.11%. For harmonized standard, the proportion of harmonized standard identical to ISO publications, it's around 40%. We will see that in the next slide. So now I will talk about the Vienna Agreement. What is the Vienna Agreement? It's the formal agreement on technical cooperation between ISO and CEN. The first agreement was published in 1991, and in 2016, the guidelines on implementation of the Vienna Agreement was released. What is the goal of the Vienna Agreement? It's to avoid duplication of work at a European level and international level, promote global economy, and to have a rational use of resources so that we don't have a standard that is at the same time published at European level. I mean, worked, developed at European level and at international level. So this is the figure. In the SEN portfolio, today we have 42.5% of harmonized standards, of standards that are identical to ISO publications. But we will see in this slide that for machinery, here we have a bit more than 50% of standards that are identical to ISO publications. And for health, there it's around 65% of standards that are identical to ISO publications. So the international aspect is very important. The internal standardization process requires consensus building at European and international level, and as well, very important, strong communication and coordination between European TC and international TC. So the same standard will apply worldwide and will provide presumption of conformity, if cited in the official journal, to European directives or regulations. So this is the process for developing, the parallel development process for developing an international standard. And on top, you see the constraints, the process for harmonized standards, specific process. So as you see, there are 3 possible assessments for this one. When requesting an assessment, the assessment is sent to the HAS contractor. The HAS contractor then sends the assessment to assign the assessment to a HAS consultant. The HAS contractor works on behalf of the, of the European Commission. And when at the end everything is okay, the work item is offered for citation to the European Commission. And when everything is okay, this is cited in the official journal and gives presumption of conformity. We have a new process for parallel work. Why? Because for parallel work, we have the same issues as for homegrown. It's still difficult today to get a compliant assessment, and due to that, we have projects that are blocked at the end of the development, because at international level, ISO proceeds, and at SEN, we can be blocked due to issues with harmonization. So the goal of this process is to improve the timely delivery of parallel standards, and, very important, to avoid having draft standards being blocked at the end of the development at European level. So same thing here, the idea is to shift the focus and the efforts at the beginning of the process to avoid being blocked at the end. And the process has been specifically designed to minimize interference with international project time frame to avoid interfering with the international development. So main principle, ISO and IC will know, we are still working on the technical practical implementation of that new process with ISO and IC, but it has been agreed with them. So ISO and IC in their database, they will be aware that a new work item is a candidate harmonized standard in Europe. If there's a CD consultation, this is key. The CD draft will be circulated to CCMC. This is already in place with ISO. We are working on that with IC. The quality check on the European elements, if certain conditions are met. I will come back to that later. Mandatory CD working draft assessment. There used to be an optional first working draft assessment. This is the same now for work items under parallel development. It's mandatory to have a CD assessment if there's a CD available. And lastly, finally, the assessment reports that will be officially shared with the international TC. We don't guarantee that they will address them, but they will be shared with them. So again, this new process impacts only the CD stage. So just the beginning of the process, the CD stage, CCMC quality check on the European elements, and the mandatory CD assessments. So to avoid disturbing the ISO process, we have some conditions to be met for the quality check to be performed on the European elements. The ISO CD should not include the European elements, otherwise the European TC will not be able to address the comments from the CCMC quality check. The CD consultation should be above 8 weeks. We'll see that in the next slide. And finally, obviously, the European elements should be made available by the CNTC for us to be able to perform the quality check. If these elements are not fulfilled, no quality check on the European elements. And this is a graphical slide that explains why, if the CD consultation is 8 weeks, we don't have time to perform the quality check. So if the CD consultation is 8 weeks we have the CD and the European annexes, then we directly go for the CD assessment. This is a summary table for the ISO process. So if there's no ISO CD, we don't do anything. If the Annex ZA is included in the ISO CD assessment, if the Annex ZA is not included in the ISO CD, it means the European TC can address the comments from the quality check or the HAS consultant. Then those are the two options. And so here, very important for the CENTC to provide the Annex ZA as soon as the CD is available. Quick information about Vienna. There's both Vienna and Frankfurt agreement, but you can find more information about those agreements here. Key points before I conclude. Start the process early. We really invite you to start very early your process, specifically about drafting the annexes, the European annexes, Annex ZA. Start very early and be ready when the CD draft is ready. The new process will happen only if the CD is available and the European elements are available. Communication, it's really key. Communication between the European TC and the international TC as well. I would say communication with the HAS consultant. If you receive a lack of compliant assessment, request a meeting with the HAS consultant to discuss the comments. When you receive the outcome of a CCMC quality check, please contact us, contact the Harmonized Standard Compliance team to discuss the comments so that we can help you address them. And then common checklist, last point, it's not mandatory for international work. It's mandatory for homegrown work only, but even for international work, we highly recommend you to use the common checklist for self-assessment and when you're drafting your standard, because it will really help you focus on the key elements related to harmonized standards. That's it for me. I'm a bit over time. Sorry for that. Last slide. A link to the webinar for the new process for harmonized standard under parallel development, where we go deep into the details. Please have a look. Come to us if you have questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Frédéric. Two short announcements. I see a lot of people still scanning the QR code when we have the Mentimeter. The link stays open, so if you open your browser, you can always access the new question, so you don't necessarily have to scan it again. And then secondly, we have reached a milestone. We are over 200 people following online, and I suggest to have a quick wave to them so they also feel included. So we have a camera there, so let's just have a quick hi to the people online, and I'm guessing they are also waving back. Yes, they are waving back, 2 people. Well, we tried, right? At least we did our part. Our next 2 speakers are Daan Bijwaard and Francisco Verdeira, and they are from EY, and they will talk a little bit about the interactions with EY and HAS consultants. So Daan and Francisco, please come forward.
Yeah, thank you very much all for joining here today. Many, of course, know the HAS system, but the direct contact between you and us is more limited, so it's great that CCMC provided us with this opportunity to speak to you. We know the HAS system is very important to your work, and we are glad to have this opportunity to give some more details about its working and potentially answer some questions directly. So what do we have on the agenda today? So we will briefly introduce the team, explain you the working of the HAS system, give you an update on the state of play of the assessment work by the consultants, and then Paco, who leads our QR team, will provide some best practices for technical committees under the HAS system, and we provide an overview of the key issues leading to a lack of compliance. So who are we? So this is our team. So it's directed by Alessandro and Joke, partners and senior directors at EY. My name is Daan, with 2 A's and in both my name and surname actually, so not as on the first slide. So I'm the project manager on this project, and as such responsible for day-to-day coordination and also the first point of contact for the Commission, the ESOs and other stakeholders. And I work in close contact with my colleagues Tim, Gosta, Hanna and Marci. Many of you, if you have, for example, asked for a meeting, you have been in contact with them. The HAS consultants are in daily contact with them. Today also Hanna and Tim are here in the room. And we have also today here our senior advisor on standardization, Francisco Verdero, or Paco, as most of you know him, and he leads our QR team. He will present the second part of the presentation. So if there are any questions after this meeting, you can always reach out to us on the HAS support email address written here. So here you see the legal basis of the project, but with an eye on timing, and also because it has been shown by the Commission before, I won't reiterate it, but it's the legal basis where our project is based on, why we assess standards. But I will move immediately to the key stakeholders. So yeah, who are that? So it's of course the team at DG Grow and the desk officers covering the different sectors. It are the 3 standardization organizations and their technical committees, of course, plus the important element of the HAS, the key element of the HAS project, of course, the HAS consultants that are employed by EY. And with all of these actors, we are in frequent contact. Like I said, not usually, apart from meeting requests, directly with TC, so it's great to have this opportunity today. So these are the sectors currently covered by the project. So there are 22 in total. This is not a static list. It has changed over time. There might also be some sectors might be added. And of course, this also includes the two sectors which are which are here present today. So that's machinery, MD for machinery directive now, also of course including the regulation, and medical devices, so healthcare equipment, HE. So the HAS project is split into 4 main tasks. So task 1 is the admin and logistical assistance that's carried out by our core HAS support team. So we manage the pool of consultants, provide the necessary documents, provide training, etc. Task 2 are horizontal verifications and checks of a non-technical nature. So this the checks we carry out on the documents provided by the HAS consultants. We check if their assets are actually eligible, and also includes the quality checks that they are carried out by the quality assurance team. So under task 3, monitor the performance of the HAS consultants, identify typical non-compliance concerns, which I will show some results of later on. And we also look at how to continuously improve the process. And task 4 is actually what we are doing today, which is the communication to the stakeholders. So we would like to underline that the HAS project is a service. It's a service to the European Commission and to the technical bodies of the European Standardization Organization, and it aims to increase compliance of harmonized standards, and as such ultimately also, of course, increase the publication rates of European harmonized standards in the official journal of the EU. The latter was achieved during the former contract, and this is of course also the aim of the current contract. And you see here that the main features, so yeah, we ensure that typical compliance we aim to ensure that typical compliance concerns are identified to reduce non-compliance. We provide training, as already mentioned. Support the Commission in its efforts to reduce the number of non-cited standards, harmonized standards, which was previously quite high, as you know. And we make sure that the resources of the HAS consultants, so the HAS consultants can actually focus on their work, which is carrying out assessments. So next, I'd like to give you an update on where we are in the HAS contract, so some numbers. So we started the project in August 2022. Actual assessment work started in October. And since we started, we have received and accepted, so this includes the eligible assessments, more than 1,500, so 1,500 requests from the ESOs, of which currently about 1,400 have been completed. So more than 95 of the requests we received under this contract in the last 2 years have been completed. And currently there are about 100 ongoing, or slightly less even last week. So earlier this week when I looked at the figures, it was 85 in total are ongoing. So that means that they are currently with the HAS consultants or are ongoing with the QR team. So previously had a backlog of unassigned items, so meaning items that we could not yet assign to a consultant because they were fully booked. This is currently not the case, so there's no backlog. And the number we have ongoing about equals 1 month of work. So in principle we should, and that's also what we see in our current figures, be able to do most assessments in 35 days. Currently we are doing about 50% in 35 days, and close to 80% are done within 50 days. That has mainly to do that within the largest sector you see here in machinery, there are still quite some assessments planned in advance. So they are planned with the HAS consultant, assigned to the HAS consultant, but he has only time in a couple of weeks because he is doing actual assessments at the moment. So what does the status for machinery and healthcare equipment look specifically? You see that for both sectors we completed more than 90%, so 93% for machinery and 94% for healthcare equipment. Of course, important to note here is that we will never reach 100% as long as the project is ongoing, so it's also not the aim to reach 100%, but you still see that the overall completion rate is quite high. So since January, for machinery, for example, we received 17 assessment requests and completed 25. And for healthcare, we received 10 and completed 14. So we are actually delivering more than we receive currently. So onto the interaction between us as HAS support team and the HAS consultants. So here you see the different stages of the process, already also shown by Senelec. So first of all, you are in principle required to do the self-assessment on draft standards, which is then uploaded by CCMC on the platform, and then we come in, we download it from the platform, we ensure that it's allocated to the right consultant, ensure that he or she has all the material he or she needs. The consultant carries out the assessment, send it back to us. Then we carry out a quality review, which is done by Paco's team. So this is a horizontal check, so to see that all the boxes are ticked. It's a valid assessment. If it gets green light, we share it, we load it back up again on the system of CCMC. And of course, there's the option to meet or to request a meeting with the consultant who carried out the assessment via a meeting request. And this is then used by the consultant to explain or clarify the result of the assessment. Here I won't go into detail because this was already explained by Frédéric in his presentation. So these are the different stages where you can ask for an assessment request or are required to ask for an assessment request depending on the stage. I think interesting to see here is what is the situation for the two sectors covered today. So you see that there is a certain underuse of the earlier stages, in particular the committee draft stage. And yeah, important to mention that you're highly encouraged already to ask for an assessment at the early stages of the development process, of the drafting process of a standard, as this helps with increasing compliance. So here you see the top findings. So what are the actual outcomes? The list shows the critical findings for both sectors covered today. So you see there is some overlap and some differences. You see, for example, that the Annex Z properly relates to relevant legal requirements is among the top two for both of them. But the second one, for machinery, all normative reference are available at the time of assessment, is not appearing on the top 5 lack of compliance outcomes for the healthcare equipment sector. And here you see the outcome per stage. So we still see a very high level of non-compliance. This is something we see across sectors, so not only for machinery and healthcare equipment. Overall, in the HAS system, about 20% of assessments reports have a compliant outcome. We do see that the compliance outcome is somewhat higher for later stage assessments, but arguably not as high as we would like it to be. So there remains still some work to be done also on our side. So yeah, what do we do? Before I pass over the floor to Paco, what do? We look at ways to constantly improve the system. One important thing is that we avoid as much as possible changing the consultants between different assessments, and also try to improve consistency through guidance and training, for example. So I won't mention the other elements. This is just something we wanted to highlight regarding the rules of meeting request. I think I will pass over the floor to Paco with an eye on timings, but please have also a look when the slides are shared with you. This gives you an overview of the rules for asking for a meeting, which we encourage you to follow. Thank you very much.
Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. You can see that we have different, the European standards can adapt to different countries and situations. So now I'm adapting the European standard to the southern part of Europe. We had a Dutch representative before. So I'm going to proceed with the presentation. I guess the green button is the one moving the slides. I'm going to address some topics related on things that should be checked before submitting a standard or the draft standard for assessment. So the first thing is we should verify if the legal things related to standardization requests, the absence of formal objections. What does it mean that? Well, if you had a previous version of the standard and this standard, for example, was subject to a formal objection from a member state, these kind of things should be considered before assessing your self-assessment of the draft for submission for assessment. Also, we should have some elements like the Annex set, the European elements, normative references should be available for the consultant in order to ensure that he can perform or she can perform the assessment in the right way. So this is more or less the step one of the verifications that we have to do on drafts before, let's say, submitting and then us before accepting. Then it has to be a verification regarding the legal requirements related to the standardization request. You know that the standardization request sets the reference for drafting, for preparing a draft harmonized standard, and therefore we have to check that all the requirements in the standardization request are covered by the draft before submitting it for citation. And of course, the standardization request is associated with a legal harmonization document, a regulation or a directive, and therefore we have to check whether the standard sufficiently addresses and satisfies the essential requirements, which, as it was explained by the Commission before, the essential requirements are the mandatory parts. The harmonized standards really are giving solutions on how to comply, but the what has to be complied is in the regulation or in the directive. Also, we have to be extremely careful, and I will address that in the next slide. We have to be extremely careful with the non-harmonized part, because we know that there is a part that is associated with the essential requirements of the directives or regulations, but then there is another part, which is what we call the non-harmonized part, which should be also not create problems and be completely clear that it's not associated with the legal effect, the presumption of conformity that will be provided by the harmonized standard. This is just, again, a resume. I'm not going to read everything. You have the slides, but just to emphasize here that, of course, we have to ensure that before submitting a draft, that the draft really is associated with the legislation, with the work program associated with the directive or regulation, that we have to check that which are the legal requirements that the draft standard has to cover, We have to check also if it satisfies those requirements that have to be covered. And again, here we have to be extremely careful. The scope of the standard should be aligned with the scope of the draft standardization request, and the non-harmonized content should be clearly identified. So this is more or less in a nutshell, but what we have identified is a set of best practice from technical committees for a smooth, let's say, assessment and a compliance assessment. Normally, when you are submitting a draft, you should make sure that all the European elements, or you, or CEN and CENELEC CCMC Secretariat, should ensure that all the relevant elements, European elements, are there, so the consultant can assess these different elements. We should, here again, and this has been said during the whole morning, we encourage you really to ensure that you submit as early as possible, possibly in committee draft, in order to have the biggest number of assessments or the greatest number of assessments possible. Ensure that a complete annex set is provided with the sufficient granularity. Ensure that the most recent version of the standard is submitted, so therefore the assessment from the HAS consultant is relevant. And also, if it's possible, if you can submit a track changes version, this will facilitate the HAS consultant to understand which are the changes that were introduced from the previous version of the draft or even of the standard. And then, of course, the comments from the consultant are comments. They are not mandatory for you. You are not obliged to take them into consideration. But of course, what it is also a good practice is that you identify what are you doing with those comments in your table for template for comments. Just to say that that this is, you should perform a self-verification. We know that CCMC has a unit also, and Frederic was talking about this, also at the level of CCMC in Brussels. And of course, then we have the assessment, and then the Commission also has the assessment for compliance. So your work is really scrutinized, I must say. Yeah? So you are really, your work is being scrutinized by many people. But this is the way, let's say, to ensure that we get compliant standards and that are cited in the official journal. Which are the most, I'm completely out of time, I'm aware of that, so time's up, so I will go fast. It's incredible still today, but normative references are still an issue preventing for compliant assessments, and this is something that can be really solved very easily. Also, in your case, I mean, it's hard to believe that machinery sector is not performing risk assessment, because in fact you are performing quite often the risks assessment, but the assessment that the requirements in the regulation are covered is also something that is essential, and this should be done by each technical committee before submitting these drafts. Not addressing correctly the requirements in regulation, repeating them sometimes, interpreting them. So all these things should be avoided in order to avoid lack of compliance and non-citation. Also, lack of or non-clear or non-repeatable assessment methods, or, for example, other issues that could lead the standard to not to give legal certainty, for example, not to have a sufficient granularity in the Annex Set A or set means that the user of the standard doesn't understand which parts of the standard are really corresponding to which essential requirement. Not respecting the neutrality principle. This is something that happens sometimes in the standards. This means, for example, using the content of the standard to induce to a particular conformity assessment process or system that sometimes is not in line with the regulation. So the standard should be neutral in the context of conformity assessment, as well as on the obligations of the manufacturers or other economic players. These kind of things should be avoided in the standards. So things should be very clear, crystal clear. Regarding normative references, they should be dated. They should be done to European or international standards. Here there is a mistake because the key of the R and the key of the T are together. This is ITU T, not R, but okay, it's the telecommunications part, but okay. In this case, ISO IC or ITU documents are acceptable. And then we have some international references that you could use. For example, international organizations in which the European Union and the member states are participating. Here you have the list. I'm not going to lose time because I'm completely out of time. Here you have also some non-acceptable uses of normative references. I think I covered some of them. Please try to avoid interpretations or duplications of legal texts. Standards should give the how, okay? This means if you just copy the requirements in the regulation, you are giving the what, and the what is in the legislation, not in the standard, okay? So I think the message is clear, you have it there written, I'm not going to enter more. So as a conclusion, and I think it's a conclusion of both the presentation from Dan and myself, please use, you have up to 4 occasions, up to 4 opportunities to assess, use them wisely, please. This doesn't necessarily mean you will have 4, but you may have up to 4 and use them. We have to really, we are collaborating a lot with CEN and CENELEC Secretariat and of course with the European Commission. I think we are doing an effort, a tremendous effort from all sides to really increase consistency and quality of the assessments, and communication is key. So in that respect, please make sure if you have any question, address these questions to CCMC, and then we will have just a dialogue to try to get, let's say, the assessment done in the most smooth and effective way. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm very sorry for taking up the time, but this is what it was. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Indeed, we are a little bit later than foreseen, so I will just introduce our next speaker, which is Gonçalo Ascensão. He is the account manager from CEN and CEN-CENELEC, and he will talk about drafting guidance. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. So we are a little bit behind, so I'll try to move a little bit faster. So it's okay. Okay. So now it's the moment where we will repeat some of the information that has already been given, but I will focus more on the drafting perspective. So I'll try to highlight some of the main elements. So I will cover drafting principles. As Paco just highlighted, normative reference are still one of the key elements, and it's definitely not the easiest point. And last but not least, I will also cover how to deal with the Annex A. So for all standardization drafters, this is, I would say, the Bible for the drafting. So internal regulations part 3 are pretty much aligned also with the ISO IC directives part 2, so which means that the rules that we follow on CEN and CENELEC are also pretty much aligned with ISO and IC. Of course, there are elements that there are some deviations, and of course, for harmonized standards, and I'll come back to that a little bit later, there are some points where there is maybe another emphasis that has been given for the drafting of harmonized standards. We also have additional guidance on the CEN-BOS. The link is in the presentation, and we have specific elements dealing with the harmonized standards. Then, going very simply to some of the principles for standardization. So, the objective, and I think sometimes people tend to forget this objective, is to write clear and unambiguous provisions. So, when we start drafting the standard, there is a precise idea and scope, and maybe sometimes during the development, people tend to forget that. So I think it's also important to change the mindset these days, that people focus really on what is the objective of the standard. moreover, we see more and more that for harmonized standards, we have to be even more precise than for any other standard. So this is important to keep that in mind. Then, also, which is maybe a reflection of how to get consensus in the draft standard building, it's how to get objectively verifiable provisions. Sometimes this is a long discussion, sometimes consensus tends to move away maybe for very precise requirements, but I think this is more and more important to bear in mind for the drafters. Then, Paco highlighted as well, one of the issues with harmonized standards is still, and I think there is also some historical facts, so this also comes from the past, where in some cases, in some sectors, it was possible to refer to different parties. So, but I think this is actually a very simple exercise, and we'll come back to this. It's just basically, we just need to say what to be done, and try to avoid that this is the party that needs to do it. I think this is the main message to pass. So, going a little bit to some specific examples, very often it's common to see in the drafting unclear provisions or requirements. So for instance, in this case that you see in the screen, dealing with protective impedance, there is a reference to a limited to a safe value. Of course, a safe value can be very subjective. People will have different interpretations, so it's important also to focus on, you know, how someone else is going to read what we are drafting and what we are putting in the standard. Another example is, you know, the next one where we say metal showing a great difference, how you define a great difference. So this is the type of, I would say, formulations that long-term people should go away from. If we move on to the next slide, and of course maybe also to highlight if you are in the previous case, this is often dealing or resulting in a lack of compliance assessment, because this is the type of formulations that the consultants will challenge in the assessment. Then, going a little bit more with positive examples, so for instance, dealing with a slicing machine, you know, precising very clearly that which is the sound pressure level not to be exceeded, or for instance, dealing with installation of resistance, you know, that you specify the values that you want to define. So this is a clear way to deal with it. Of course, as you can imagine, this is where sometimes it's difficult to find consensus and to reach an agreement what is the best solution. So this is a good way forward. Then, as I said, when we talk about neutrality principle, it's not a very easy subject because there are different interpretations on how to deal with that. And there is also, I would say, in essence, coming back to the history of standards, very often the manufacturers were those developing the standards. So, and there is a tendency to refer to the responsibilities of the operator that is the main driver, I would say, for the standard drafter. So this type of sentence saying that the manufacturer shall specifically do something, it's very common. We also have cases of reference to third parties or to other parties. So this is the type of elements that we should avoid. Moving on how to correct this is, as I said, is basically focus on what the task that needs to be done. So, you know, you can say in this case that it shall be specifically ensured that the test specimen shall be tested. So, you know, you just reformulate in a simple way the sentence without referring to the manufacturer. I want to point out that also from the legislative perspective, there are several conformity assessment schemes, and sometimes people tend to mix the legal obligations associated with the conformity assessment scheme with the way to transfer that into the technical standard. So I think this is important also for people to bear in mind that even if certain tasks are associated to a certain body due to the conformity assessment scheme, this should not be transferred into the standard, and this is something that will happen outside of the development of the document. So if we move on, we'll get into maybe the more challenging subject these days on developing harmonized standards, which is dealing with normative references. So internal regulations part 3 deal with the clause dealing with normative reference that maybe not everyone is fully aware. It's an informative clause in the standard that basically identifies all the normative references identified in the body of the text. So it's to help the user to see if there are other documents that are referred in the body. Now, how to use that normative reference? Usually you need to go to the reference in the text to see what is the document that needs to be used, if it's a dated or an undated provision. So, as I said, for harmonized standards, internal regulations part 3 are not enough, even if some of the principles in IR3 related to normative reference are pretty much in line with the development of harmonized standards. However, there is actually today a precision that, for harmonized standards, there is additional guidance to deal with the handling of normative references. Now, what is clear that today we can have normative reference to harmonized standards or to any other type of standards. They need to be dated, active, and published, at least when the document is finalized. Vademecum Part 3 also gives some background on also why the Commission is defending the need to have a precise reference. So, of course, also what is important is not to refer to outdated or withdrawn normative references and to documents that are not publicly available, and as I said, also not to refer to drafts, at least at the moment of the finalization of the document. So, now, how are the normative references supposed to be handled, for clauses dealing with presumption of conformity? So, if we are dealing with presumption of conformity, IR3 plus additional guidance is necessary. If we are not dealing with presumption of conformity, IR3 principles are good enough. So this is important to highlight that, IR3 are not enough to deal with normative reference in harmonized standards at the moment. So now going a little bit more into details, and I think going through this you will start seeing as well that how challenging it can be to deal with normative references. So as a matter of fact, as you see in this example, in a clause 593 of a specific standard, there is a reference to an undated reference in the body of the text. So as a user, you would have to use the latest version available. You go to the clause 2, there is a specific dated version. Now, this is not correct, so you should date in the body of the standard, as you see in this case. If we want to be even more precise, because sometimes also in terms of the granularity of the documents is also to focus on which elements of this specific normative reference needs to be used, you should then follow this example. So referring to the clause of the to the reference of the document and the specific clause. And this element is also in line with internal relations part 3. So whenever you refer to specific clauses, then you have always to date, because if the standard changes, then this may not be applicable for that particular standard. So this is an important point. So as I said, certain elements in IR3 are valid. In some cases, we are going a step forward. Then, as you know, we have a specific process to prepare amendments to existing standards. So, and this is also an important element. So whenever we are dealing with an amendment, it's particularly key to focus on, am I changing the content of the standard and I'm affecting, normative references that were in the original version. So this is really a very precise work to check if something has been modified. And if it was not dated in the original version, then you should use the amendment to date the normative reference. So an additional specific drafting element. So as I said, you need to date in the clause of the standard, and then we need to reflect this information in the clause 2, which is dealing with normative references. So, for instance, as you see in this example, if you have a reference to the EN 5367/2012 in the original standard, in the amendment we are replacing for the 2020 version, and of course, in the clause 2 of the amended standard, we also be referring to the 2020 version. So, it's important to bear in mind in terms of the drafting, and of course CCMC through the handling of the documents is also take that into account. It's important to focus that we are also changing this element in the clause 2, because at the end the amendment needs to be put together with the main previous version of the document. In SEN, we do consolidate the document, so this is, of course, a step that will be taken on board also in the consolidation of the document, but it's important that you also think about it while drafting the standard. Then, Can we still use undated references? We can, as long as the reference is informative and as long as it's not directly connected to presumption of conformity clause. Of course, we need to be very careful because sometimes things evolve, so we need to be careful that, by changing the standard during the handling of the document, that we cannot, we will not end up in a situation where something that was correct at the inquiry and then at the formal vote will be incorrect. So this is a point to bear in mind. Exceptionally, and we do not recommend to go into this route, if you have a good justification and also if the Commission has agreed the justification, you could still use undated normative reference. Those should be very exceptional cases, so our recommendation is date by default. Now, we go also maybe to one of the most challenging elements dealing with normative references, which is dealing with documents under development. So, as I said, the Commission has emphasized that we need to refer to publicly available documents, as you can imagine. Very often, if you refer to another document, so we may have 2 or 3 or even more documents developed in parallel. So in these cases, and now also with the new modification of the system, we also have introduced the conditional compliant assessment, which also can be used in these cases. So if you refer to a document that is under development, so you can refer. So, and you see an example in the screen. So there are actually 2 ways at the moment. So using a long dash with a footnote that the document is in their preparation, or a more traditional and something that has been used in the past, you refer to FPREN and the reference of the document with the date of it. So in this way, the consultant will know also that this document is done in parallel, and at the finalization of the document, if this is the only question preventing the citation, they could do a conditional compliance assessment result, and then we could finalize and refer to the final deliverable. So what is extremely important is to bear in mind that these documents need to be done in parallel so that, when we finalize one, the other is available at the same very moment. Now, keeping in mind some principles on normative reference, latest version to be used, so and it should be a published document. Drafts can be referred as long as they are developed in parallel. References to EN, ISO, and IEC published standards. You may remember that Paco presented a slide that is a little bit more extensive, but I think this is a main principle to be followed, so and there are some exceptional cases. We can allow reference to non-EN, ISO standards as long as they are not dealing with the presumption of conformity. On the other hand, there is a process in SEN where you need to take a specific decision to allow reference to other documents that are not EN or ISO IEC documents. And of course, when an exceptional justification has been granted for using something undated. To be avoided as well, TRs and TSs. TSs, we know that in some cases there were some ad hoc situations, but they should not be used as normative reference in harmonized standards. Bearing in mind that we also follow similar processes with ISO parallel projects, we recommend also to follow the same exact approach. We know that in ISO, this approach for normative references there is more a tendency sometimes to refer to undated normative reference. So what we have done is that we have developed an ad hoc approach that we can date normative reference in a table ZA2 in the Annex Z. And we have developed some specific guidance, so there is a link to the webinar explaining more in process. So we are not covering this point here, but so it's also that we have developed some solutions to deal with parallel projects. So now we come to the question. Oops, sorry. So can I refer to undated normative reference in HENs? And the possible answers are yes, I can decide to refer to what I want. Yes, but only in cases not linked to presumption of conformity. No, I need to date all normative references. No, I cannot refer to other normative reference at all. So we start seeing things going into different directions. We seem to have a very stubborn person that has decided to refer to whatever he wants. But it seems to be alone, so maybe it's not a good thing. So, and of course, it's the second option in the screen, only those that are not linked to. Of course, if you want to follow a very precautionary approach, you could always date everything. At least you will have under control. So if you move on then to my final part of the presentation, and I'm very close to the time. Dealing with Annex Z. So some important points, and noting also the previous presentations, which were already quite some in detail. So it's important to refer standardization request and the legislation. So this is quite important. As I said, it's important to have precise requirements, and of course that we made a good link in the Annex Z. So going to the granularity of the drafting of the standard, and also the link in the table Z, in the Annex ZA. I would say it's not so common, but it's still in some sectors quite usual to have multiple pieces of legislation. For instance, machinery, LVD, LVD, EMC, EMC, RED. So there are cases, so it's important to have multiple Annex Zs, so for each piece of legislation. And as I said before, for harmonized standards prepared in parallel with ISO, it's also important to focus that there is the possibility to date the normative references in the table ZA2. So this is also a possibility coming with Annex Z. Now, as I said before, there is a lot of information available. So there is a links to forms templates, the checklist for HENs. There are several templates for the different pieces of legislation. We have specific instructions in the sandbox dealing with the drafting of standards. We have guidance on how to deal with a normative reference. There is a specific document for that. And as I said, there is also the webinar dealing with the normative reference in ISO standards. So there is a lot of reliable information. Key takeaways, and my time is done. So clear and unambiguous provisions shall be specified in the standards. Focus on very objectively verifiable requirements. So this is important. Focus on writing the standard in a neutral way. Default solution, date normative references. And of course, focuses as well that they need to be dated, active, and should be published. So this is the main takeaways from my presentation, and that's it from my side.
Thanks a lot. As was mentioned already, we are slightly late. So my suggestion is that we just skip lunch break. Can you just raise your hand if that's okay with you? We have here this table. We will just continue amongst us. Now we still have 15 minutes to talk, and I would like to invite all speakers on stage. So everybody who has a contribution, and the other ones, you can go to the Mentimeter, because we have a Q&A session here. You can either put in a new question, or you can also upvote something that is already there. And we'll just pick, for now, the questions that have more upvotes, so we can then see what could be some of the answers to that. I would like, if that is at all possible, to give short and concise answers. And let's start with the first one, which comes from the online community. Mostly international experts are working on international and European level. Is the European Mirroring Committee responsible for Annex ZA or NZZ? Who can answer that, or who wants to answer it? I'll just put it on. Voilà, there you go.
Thank you. You wanted a concise answer? Yes.
Wonderful. Yes.
Yes, it's the European TC committee who is responsible for drafting the Annex ZA and ZZ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I repeat that it's very important for them to start early, so that when the international draft is ready, we have the European annexes that are ready.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Next question, also from our online community. How to interpret the dates of the replaced standard and the new standard that replaced it, given in the OJC series, it has not been withdrawn, OGL. is the standard still valid and harmonized?
I can reply to this. I don't know of any cases where when there is an OJEU series publication, when the C series publication has not been repealed and replaced by the new LC, So I don't think this is a real case.
No, it's not a real case. Okay. You all agree? Or you don't know? No. Okay. Could you repeat it, Federico?
Normally, in the past we published on the OJEU C series, the lists. And when we switched in December 2018 to publication of decision on the L series of the OJEU, when we publish a new, at least until there is, of course, a consolidated, for the moment in which we publish a consolidated list on the L series, we also repeal the previous communication on the C series. So clearly, what is cited there is no longer a harmonized standard.
Yeah.
That's my reply.
Was that clear?
No, not the slightest.
Not yet.
Because you say that in the OJ Series L, that is what is required. Then you started talking about then you said, but there's the C Series. I don't think this is on. I can talk loud.
Okay. You can.
The C Series got carried forward, but at a date will no longer be in effect.
Yeah, you need the microphone because we need the input online.
Okay, well, what would be very helpful is speak a little slower. I'm a native English speaker, so I have difficulty. And then secondly, I really would like a very succinct answer. Yes, no, this, or as of this date in this column, but switching between the L series to C series to L, then in an S series, no idea really what you said. And please forgive me, I'm old.
First of all, I can confirm there is no S series in the official journal. We only have C and L, so there's the option. F? No, I'm pretty sure I've never talked about F series because it does not exist.
Okay.
The way the question is formulated is very poor because I have to try to interpret and understand what is meant. What I'm saying is that in December 2018, we start publishing on the L series. Of course, there is transition period. Until a new publication on the L series is done in a sector, the old one remains fully valid. It's not repealed. But by now, I think we have replaced all the old communication, or we should have replaced all the old communication in the C series by a new decision on the L series. I don't know if some sector remain. Eco-design, yes, of course, that is a problematic sector. But in the sectors that are addressed by today's seminar, so we are talking about machinery, medical devices, and tomorrow LVD, we have replaced the old series, the old publication with a new publication. So now what counts is the latest list published in the L series.
Okay.
And from now on, all publications are on the L series.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's why we're here, right? So our third question, how does NLF apply to non-tangible goods like software, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity? Anybody wants to care to give a voice on that? Same, yeah?
Yeah, I think the question is correct because these are new sectors that are being added to the NLF's family. Well, software not specific, but artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, there are already standardization requests being adopted. Well, it's the same system in the sense that we, in the legislation, we introduce essential requirements. Mm-hmm. And of course, then from that moment on, and there is an obligation in some cases to certify, and in any case to prove compliance of those applications with those essential requirements. Yeah. So in this, this is true, new sectors, not really manufactured goods, yes, but the principle remains the same. So the legislation and the essential requirements are the starting point.
Mm-hmm. So the principle that applies to physical goods
also
applies here.
Of course, it's a challenge to adapt them to this type of product, but the approach is in principle the same.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We have, 22 questions. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of those. But lots of questions from the online community. The burden of proof for harmonized standards shift to national authorities. Are notified bodies also national authorities? No. No. Simple answer. Good. We are going through this quite smoothly. Answers are being answered at, or questions are being answered at a rapid pace. Imagine if standardization would go this fast. All our lives would be easier. Standards should reflect the state of the art. Are peer-reviewed articles in scientific journals also considered state of the art? Yes. Gonzalo.
I think, and this is also coming back to what I referred about building consensus. So sometimes standards are not necessarily referring the best solution is the best solution that everyone can agree with. And I would tend to say that in some cases, scientific journals is maybe not the state-of-the-art technology, I would say.
Okay, Francisco, you want to add something to that? Yeah? You agree? Yes. Yeah. Anything else to add on that question? Okay. Could E&Y provide guidelines like for the MD when it comes to frequent issues met? I think we either go to Dan or Francisco.
Yeah, you can take it.
Yeah? Francisco, you can add then if there's something.
I think Dan can already refer to that in his presentation. He said that normally we can give training to particular sectors to try to share experiences on good practices. But, regarding guidelines, they are not developed by EY, they are developed by CEN and CENELEC. There is an extensive collection of guidelines for sectors. But okay, I mean, what we can do, of course, is this kind of events organized for specific sectors to try to spread the good practices and shut up here.
Anything to add? No, that was a complete answer. Great. I think you are the best Q&A panel I had until now. So efficient. Okay, I think our fifth question already. How does HAS Consultants deal with informative annexes of a standard? For example, annexes which describe in detail how to fulfill a requirement of the normative part. Are these informative? And then I suppose annexes is still to be finished. Is there some perspective? Yes.
First of all, in my opinion, those are not very common. And I think this is also going back to having precise and clear requirements so that people understand what is supposed to be done. Of course, when we go to very evolved technologies, this may not always be straightforward. I think going back to the principles of the internal regulations, an informative annex is something that you don't need to follow. So I think if it's there, it's just additional guidance. We go into one of the elements that we covered before. If it's not dealing with presumption of conformity, so it's something that, of course, if there is some red lights, the consultant can always raise, but it's in theory not something that should be in the focus of the assessment for the harmonization.
Okay, there was some conversation here. Is there something to add? Yes.
Yes, just one small addition. Annex Z is an informative annex.
Okay.
And it's checked thoroughly by the consultants.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks a lot. And let's see, we have another answered question. More from online. You are on fire, online group. As part of citation of standards, as harmonized standards, there can be restrictions to part of the essential requirements. Can an explanation be given on the legal impacts of such restrictions? Maybe somebody else from, yeah? Gabriela.
Maybe I can reply. Yeah, thank you very much, Sven. Well, an example could be a standard on audiovisual that is referenced under the GPSD, for example, and it covers, now I don't remember exactly the reference number, but it covers a very wide range of risks. And this standard is published with restriction as far as concerned the damage to hearing. So for the limits, for the noise of personal music players. This is an example of restriction, and the legal impact of such restriction is that a product that complies with the clause of the standard covering this risk has the presumption of conformity. I don't know if you want to add.
Yes, in general terms, a restriction is always a restriction of the presumption of conformity, of the legal effect. It's usually very well described in the publication. It might mean that, another example, this standard provides presumption of conformity with those requirements, but not one specific type of product for which the standard is not adequate, for instance. So usually it's used when the standard is almost good,
Okay.
and it would be a pity not to reject it just for one small thing. So we simply specify, okay, in this specific case, for this specific product, for this specific requirement, the legal effect of presumption of conformity is not given.
Yeah.
But we try to avoid it, but sometimes it's the only alternative to non-publishing, publishing with a restriction.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we can take one or two more, and then I leave you for lunch. What is done in the CCMC quality check? Only non-technical stuff or also technical changes to meet the essential requirements of the EU? I hear some comments here, but Frederick, you seem to be eager to answer this one.
Yeah, so during the quality check, indeed, we focus on non-technical aspects, mostly aspects related to internal regulations part 3, to normative references, and we check as well the annexes Z, but we mostly focus on checking if the right template has been used. We don't check the technical content because, again, we are not HAS consultant. We focus on horizontal aspects and we stop there. And then the HAS consultant will really focus on top of checking what we checked, will focus on the technical aspect, and by having the quality check and the HAS assessment, both checks will help improve the quality of the draft.
Anything to add here? No? You may.
Resist. Sorry. No, I will be brief. The technical committees are the ones making the self-assessment of the technical parts. So I do not see CCMC replacing. They don't have this. It's you, the one that you have to really ensure that the technical part is aligned with the requirements of the standardization request and the regulation or the directive. Okay, so it is you. The technical part is the technical committees. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's 12:30, so we're gonna close off this Q&A part. Thanks a lot to all of you for your contributions and also your answering the questions here on stage. Thank you here for asking questions and also, of course, all the people online. We'll take a look at all the other questions and maybe in the reports there can still be some answers to be given when it's relevant. So thanks a lot for contributing. Yes, exactly. Good. I have just one more question. I have one question and also a short insight in what we have talked about and what's next. And so my question is, raise your hand if you learned at least or heard at least one thing that was new for you. Okay, good. You can put it down. Raise your hand if you learned, let's say, more than 5 new things. Okay. Okay, so I think I saw almost everybody raising their hand, so at least there's something you can take out of it. Very often those meetings in physical space, you can take a lot from meeting and discussing with colleagues more in depth, so I would like to invite you to do that during the lunch break. After the lunch break, there will be 2 groups. There will be a group on machinery, and you will meet here in this room. There's also going to be a group on health, and you will meet in the other room, which is on the same floor here. There's only one other room here, but you will meet there. So you don't, the people from health, you don't have to come back here. You can go immediately to the next room. We will have no more plenary sessions. So that's the last thing you see of me today, which might be good news or bad news, I don't know. See you next time, and we start back at, let me see if I have that correct, 1:45. So 1:45 in your breakout groups. Enjoy the lunch and see you on another occasion.